A huge number, rich array of ways to become involved with the community, and I strongly encourage you to do that. Thanks very much. Well, I see I've completely screwed up my time schedule.
I think we have a few minutes for questions.
So we do have hopefully a few minutes, and I'm happy to take any questions about any aspects of anything I've covered and all the things I didn't cover.
Just quickly, you talked about talking to people personally. Well, the last presidential election, the news was saying, especially with a lot of young people, the vote was gotten out through YouTube and the internet. Is that an anomaly? Because the next election it seemed like a lot of the younger vote fell off to the wayside, or was it because there wasn't? I mean, has there been any studies done on that?
There's a lot going on in that question. Let me just try to address a couple of points really quickly. One is that as technology has changed, political campaigns use technology, just like business uses technology. And so 8 years ago, it was earth-shaking for, I think it was Jerry Brown, to have an 800 number for people to call to contribute to his campaign. 4 years ago, it was revolutionary for Howard Dean to be using the internet in the ways that he was. 6 years ago. And then 2 years ago, in 2008, the Obama campaign and to a lesser extent the McCain campaign used electronic media very effectively. I would say that two things are happening with electronic media, and I get into this discussion with my students all the time. One is that some of it is not necessarily connecting us in very deep ways. So, Facebook is great. The internet is great. I can find out information that as a graduate student it took me years to get, or months to get. I can find that information instantaneously. There's a lot out there. You can communicate with each other very fast. The depth of that communication and the interactiveness of that communication is much more lacking. What I was much more impressed with, rather than the social media and the YouTube things from the last two election cycles, 2008 and 2010, what I was much more impressed with was, for example, President Obama, when he was campaigning, his campaign staff would, at the beginning of most of his campaign rallies, ask people to take out their cell phones and call 5 or 10 people that they knew and talk to them about why they were at that rally and what it was about the Obama candidacy that really appealed to them. And from a political science perspective, I liked that because that was people making political connections, trying to get people politically involved who they already knew from other aspects of their life. They were talking to their family, they were talking to their friends, they were talking to people that they knew from their classes or that they knew from work. And so it was a way of, from a political scientist perspective, sort of using personal connections, going back to that idea of personal connections, and using that to engage people, to bring them into politics, and to bring them into a political discussion, at least. So from my perspective as a political scientist, that was a really good use of that electronic media, because it's, the people weren't doing that sitting isolated in their computers. They were contacting people they already knew and using that personal connection to try to engage in politics. Part of what's happened, and to go back to the other part of your question, part of what's happened between 2008 and 2010. 2010 was a non-presidential year. We always have about 15% lower turnout in a non-presidential year, 15 to 20%, and that was true this year as well. And a lot of the people who tend not to vote in a non-presidential year are the people who don't have the habit of voting. So those of us who are over 40, who have voted in a number of elections, we're just used to it. Election comes up, yeah, I go vote. For my students who voted in 2008, 2010 was like, oh, there's no presidential candidate running. Should I even bother? And so there's so a lot of those younger people and people who got enthused for the first time, either for the Obama or for the McCain campaign or for one of the other candidates, when 2010 came around, they had to sort of think about their motivation again in a way that I don't have to think about my motivation. It's the first Tuesday in November I go vote. So a lot of the drop-off is partly because of enthusiasm, because Obama wasn't able to maintain the enthusiasm among those people who he mobilized in 2008, but also simply because drop-off always happens in an off-year election, and always happens to those people who are least used to voting and least sort of connected to the political system. But if those people vote again in 2012, there's a really good chance that they'll vote in 2014, the next non-presidential election. So it's a process. It's a long process. Yes?
You talked about citizen participants, and you suggested we don't be contentious to have a political process.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
You talked about, or you recommended that citizen participants don't engage in contentious politics, and I agree with that. What I would pose to you is, what if you have an elected body that engages in contentious politics? What does that do to participation within the community, and what can community leaders do to reshape that?
Good question. First of all, political science doesn't have a really good solution, but we do have some analysis. We know that in political communities where there is contentious politics at the level of elected officials, that people tend to be turned off. And that is true both in terms of, national, people get turned off. People who perceive that Congress is contentious and they're just fighting among each other get turned off to national politics. People who perceive that their state government is all about fighting get turned off to that. People who perceive their local council, city council or county commissioners to be fighting all the time tend to get turned off. So generally not good. Good news is that, and one other thing, negative ads also tend to turn people off, unless, and here's the big caveat, if people think that the debate is real about important issues, that there are important issues that are in conflict, and that the people who are on different sides of that issue are sincere in trying to work towards a solution, trying to work cooperatively, willing to compromise, then actually people have the opposite reaction. If you show a negative campaign ad to people, or you show people a negative interaction or a contentious interaction within a city council, but it's clear that people are working towards a solution, or that negative campaign ad has really useful information about the candidates and isn't just, all about frightening the voter, people actually use that information and they can become more engaged because they are aware, they can become more aware of where they stand relative to the issues that are being debated, and they can actually gain information, and that can empower them to become participants, even if it seems contested. As long as the personal vitriol is kept to a minimum, fear-mongering is kept to a minimum, then that can actually encourage people to participate. And the other good news is that there have been there's a little bit of evidence out there that when citizens, for example, if you were to go to a city council meeting and council members were being contentious, when citizens call out their elected officials for engaging in that kind of behavior, their elected officials often will report in surveys, in studies of their behavior, that they take that seriously.
Have you seen that? Sorry.
That they are concerned about how they are viewed by the public. And if enough people in the public say, I agree with you on this issue, but I don't like the way you're handling it, that you are demonizing your opponent or whatever, elected officials do take that seriously.
Have you seen that as a community-wide effort, and not just a single circumstance at a meeting?
I can't think of any. For some reason, the only example that sort of comes to mind was the example from Billings from a couple of years ago, and there was some, I think, a hate crime against some Jewish families, and the sort of community rallied around that, and I think that really, from what I know from news reports, changed the political atmosphere in Billings somewhat. And there have not been these, to my knowledge, any sort of concerted efforts on the part of citizens to do that. This mostly comes from self-reports of political officials who've reported having those kinds of contacts and who have changed at least the way they try to interact based on that. So, and it's always worth a try. I think it's always worth reminding our public officials that if their behavior we find obnoxious, that they're not doing themselves any service. They're not living up to our expectations.
All right, anything else?
Yes.
Keep quick, everybody's ready to get that there. But I don't have to go vote. They will send it to me in the mail. Moving toward, electronic balloting and those kinds of things. And I guess I'm curious what you see, how that's impacting voter turnout, whether that's really improving things or if communities are throwing their money away.
Right. They're not throwing the money away. States like the state of Oregon, which has mail-in ballots and has for several years, their voter turnout has gone up. Jumped significantly in the first election after they instituted mail-in ballots. By the way, what I mean by mail-in ballots is every registered voter in Oregon gets a ballot only by mail, and you cannot go, there's like no polling place that you can go to vote in person. And the state of Montana is actually considering that kind of bill in its legislature. My view is that it's good in terms of increasing turnout, and so I think it makes it more convenient for voters. I'm generally in favor of that kind of thing. I'm old enough that sort of my experience of voting has largely been going to a place to vote, and so even though it's more inconvenient, I like walking out of my house and walking the 4 blocks to where I vote and seeing people, seeing the volunteers, even though it's my tax dollars at work, paying somebody to sit there for 12 hours on election day who probably doesn't have very much business most of that time. From my perspective, that's worth my taxpayer dollars because I think it is a community experience, or can be a community experience, and can be a way that we remind ourselves that we're not just those individuals with individual interests who are sort of, literally mailing it in. It's patriotic. It's an idea of, citizen duty is maybe an old-fashioned concept, but it's one that a lot of people, including a lot of my students, who have been motivated in the last 6 to 10 years that I've been teaching this class, have gotten involved in. So I'm ambivalent about it. I think it will increase turnout. I think that's a good thing, partly because we don't have very high levels. We have some skews in our turnout in the United States. But I'm worried that it will further erode this sense of community that we have.
Although I will tell you, as a recent Oregon resident, that I think many people do much better informed voting when they can sit at home, go through it, really think about it, etc., rather than feeling like you're time boxed for whatever reason, like you're trying to get in between work or whatever kind of thing. And you may not be as well informed about all the different 50 things on the ballot that you should or could be. So I will say that was one huge benefit of sitting in my home and actually being able to look up whatever bill or whatever it is and be better informed when I'm voting rather than maybe voting down a party line or whatever.
Absolutely, and that's an important feature of American elections. If you take someone from most other industrialized democracies and you ask them to vote in an American election, they'll look at the ballot and say, what in the world is going on here? I'm used to voting for party. So you go to Britain, you're voting in the national election, you are going to vote for the Tory party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democratic Party, or they've got like 24 parties. It's not like you don't have much choice, but you're voting, essentially for one office. And I lived in the state of California for 12 years, and I got used to every October I'd hear a thump as the mail was delivered, and that was the inch-thick booklet from the Secretary of State indicating all the ballot initiatives that were on the state ballot and the exact language of the ballot initiatives. So American democracy requires a lot of its citizens to be informed voters. And so that is, in fact, another important benefit of voting by mail, whether you do it on an individual basis and get your ballot sent to you by the county registrar, or if we do it on a statewide basis. It gives you more time to read that, to know what's on the ballot, and to do some research about it to make an informed decision.
Thank you.
All right, just to wrap a few things up, once again, thank you to the sponsors. We got Anderson's Miracle, Royal Deputy Meyer Community Medical Center, Farm Bureau Financial Services, which is well back there, Louis Higgins and Lucia, JCCS, St. Patrick Hospital, our host, they did a great job. The food, everything was, I thought, really good. Snowball, Harris Nursery, Landscape, and Holiday Inn. Speaking of Snowball, we have a final giveaway, which is a one-day pass.
No.
Right?
No way.
One-day pass to Snowball.
Not Carrie.
I'm going with you.
Did Carrie turn around and say, Skipping school.
As a reminder, your sheets, please complete them. They're for your benefit as much as they are for the committee. Committee did a great job. I hope you all think the same thing. If you do, give them a round of applause. One other reminder,
throwing out really specious arguments and casting a lot of sort of doubt around, hoping that that would cloud your judgment about whether this was necessary or not. And I feel like I succeeded. So, sorry.
We were on
But,
you.
I mean, just some of the ways in which I played fast and loose. You know, I cited that number about the overall revenues, and Mike sort of called me on this. He talked about the tax base growing and therefore revenues growing. But that number, it includes, you know, water fees and, you know, like improvements to the sewer plants that are paid for by bonds, and it includes all kinds of things that really obscure whether or not these cities are actually growing the size of government or not. Same with the rentals, you know, in 44,000 rentals is a lot of rentals, but, you know, what does that represent as a proportion of total rentals statewide? It's a relatively minor amount. You know, one of the ways in which this it actually helps a lot is that property taxes are not indexed to inflation, and sales taxes go up as the value of money changes. And so, inflation is what's really robbing local communities of their ability to pay for services, because, you know, even increasing your property taxes at the rate of inflation means they're going up 2 to 3% per year. That's what salaries are going up, and unless you want to stop giving raises to police and firefighters, you're going to be faced with those property tax increases. If you have a source of income that's indexed to inflation, it becomes easier to make those ends meet. I'm not sure that the 14th Amendment and equal protection allows you to decide, like, you're only going to pay this tax if you don't have a Montana driver's license. In Washington, they do the opposite, where, like, if you're from out of state, they'll waive the tax. I don't know about that.
Resorts to it.
Yeah, they don't.
If you live in
If you live in a resort
Colorado,
town, interesting. President of the rich house.
tax the outsiders.
And then the final thing I would just say is that I heard a lot of lack of urgency to address this issue in sort of the way you came at it. And I would just submit that that's because you're not charged with balancing a city budget every year. And so you're like, well, it wasn't perfect this time. Maybe next time we'll get around to it. So anyway, I really enjoyed the exercise and everything, and I appreciate the opportunity to present and follow up.
I think you decided exactly the way the legislature would decide. I mean, they would have killed this thing so quickly that, you know, and I think the context of this would, remember now, you're sitting in a committee, and let's not do local government, let's say it's Judiciary Committee, and you've got medical marijuana that's a huge issue. You've got all the DUI laws, you've got major criminal laws coming in front of you. You're hearing 3 to 4 bills, you know, in about a 3-hour period. You know, that each one has intensity to it, and it keeps building. So you hear that 3. The next day you hear that 3. The next day you hear that 3. And then the committee chair says, oh, by the way, we heard that X bill, you know, 3 days ago. I'm going to do executive action on it tomorrow, so be ready. And so all of a sudden, you know, that bill that was complicated on local government tax or whatever it might be, that you've kind of forgotten about because you've had 6 or 8 major bills between then and now that you were going to do some research on that you didn't do. So what happens? They'll kill a bill because they haven't had time to do the research, or they haven't considered an amendment, or that because they're too busy. You know, and a little bit of that gets to now term limits, a little bit, you know, I don't want to get into that issue, but where you had a lot of institutional memory there and they knew all the issues associated with local government, you know, taxes and that kind of thing, but now they don't have that background. And so all they hear is at that hearing. And if you were at that hearing as a legislator of the 9 in the Senate, it might be 18, there are 18 members in the House, they're double the size of the committees. After that committee, let's say there was no information on a particular important aspect, then you need to go to your staff, your professional staff, and say, has there been information submitted before on local option taxes on that particular issue? They will find it for you. Because in 3 days or 4 days, you've got to vote on that. If you kind of like that bill with an amendment, you can do that. You can use your staff to help you with that. But you've got to know the context is intense. And so by the time you get there, you're hearing a bill, there are 15 other ones. You're on 2 committees. And so this isn't just the committee, the hearings from those bills, it's your afternoon committee as well. And so you've got lots of those things. And so one of the points I want to make is that when you get to the floor, all of a sudden, you're only on 2 committees. You might be on Judiciary and Fish and Game. And so all of a sudden, the bill dealing with state retirement comes to the floor. Well, I don't know anything about state retirement, but I trust you. I've heard you speak before. I don't know if you're Republican or Democrat, but I've trusted you before. You seem to know what you're talking about. So you'll stand up on the floor, and you'll see this during the session, that people gradually get some expertise in given areas, and when they talk, people listen. And that's what happens. I'm not on that committee, so I'm going to listen to people on the floor, because no lobbyists can be there, right? It's just legislators presenting testimony. Standing up and just ranting and raving. But if I hear somebody that knows what they're talking about, I'm going to listen on a bill, because I'm trying to read it while they're talking. Because it's so initiative. Remember, you got 500 or 600, 700 bills, hitting those desks all the time, and you try to read every bill, but if you can't, you listen to the people that know what they're talking about. And then you can get up and ask questions of those people and say, did you consider this in committee? Did you not consider that? Why did you vote this way? Why did you put this amendment on? You can ask those things. And so you end up saying, why didn't they read all the bills? They can't. It's impossible. But you can rely on people who are really good. So that's the point that you need to make. And then, they're required to vote on those bills, and so that time after a hearing to the time they're voted on is the time when you want to make sure you're making those calls in. If you really don't like a bill or really do like a bill, say, how are you going to vote? You heard so-and-so bill, how are you going to vote? And if they say no, you say, explain it. Or if you want a bill, and if you say, then are you going to stay with that vote? Because a lot of times they'll tell you no, and then change their vote when they get to the next. So, or if I'm the sponsor of that bill and I notice that maybe you guys didn't like it, I'm going to ask, and in Montana legislation, there aren't duplicate bills. There isn't the same bill. You're supposed to be in both houses. We don't do that. But in many cases, somebody does have a local option tax that might be in the House. And if we kill the bill over in the Senate, then that bill's dead too. Because remember, one subject clearly expressed, you kill an issue, whatever it is, it's the same kind of a bill, then it can't come over. So I'd ask that committee chair, hey, I don't want executive action on that bill. I'm not ready for it. And whether I'm a Republican or Democrat, that chair, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they'll hold it. They'll say, okay, you got a couple of weeks at the most, and then I'm going to vote on it up or down. So it gives me a chance to go figure out if I can get that House bill, whoever's carrying that House bill, if it's on the same subject, local option, maybe they can get a good bill through. And then it'll come over to the Senate, and then I don't need my bill anymore. So I can just let that sit. So strategically, once you're over there a little bit, you can know the strategy of how to stop you guys from killing my bill. Using some parliamentary stuff. So the last thing I want to end up is a quote. When I was over there, I got one of the old guys, was quoting somebody, whatever it is. One of the things that he said, and I forget where the quote came from, was, you could pander to people's fears in order to win, or you could tell the truth in order to lead. And I think when you talk about debates on the floor, debates in committee, testimony by people, and that sort of thing, is you want to be able to you can hear a lot of pandering going on when it comes to all sorts of issues in our society today. A lot of forces want to pull us all apart. But really leadership is about telling the truth, being right on, spot on. And I think that's where I think as you in this whole group coming out of here, and if you're talking to public officials in any way, just walk up and give them the the truth as you know it, so that that helps them make the best public policy decision when they're done. So, thanks. Mr. Chairman or Madam Chair, and thank you for hearing this bill today. It's a very important bill. It's Senate Bill 506, as you can see. This is a bill I stole from 2009. It's been cut down considerably, so it's not the full draft of this bill. So I tried to make it so that you could take a look at the highlights of that thing. So I would simply, in my opening of this bill, I want to be able to tell you why the local option tax is probably one of the most important things that we're going to do this session. All right? We may not do any other tax reform during this session. None. So this local option tax is a way for us to be able to do what we've said in all of our campaigns, and that's local control. Every one of us has said there ought to be local control in school boards, local governments, because that's what Thomas Jefferson said. That's where the control is best, is when it's at the local level. So that's why this bill comes in front of you, is because I strongly believe in local control. Local option tax is something that, with the vote of the people that's in this bill, and you can see the section of the bill that it's in, and I normally would point that out, That it's not you deciding whether you're going to tax those local governments or the people in those local governments. It's the people in those areas that are going to be making that decision. So it's important for you to remember that this bill is just allows the local government people to tax themselves. Now, what I have done is said that in here it can be no more than a 4% tax. And I think it's important to have that in statute because I don't want local governments out there potentially taxing, overtaxing people. We want it to be able to just deal with issues that are affecting local governments. So this bill is targeted in that sense. So I want to make sure that you knew that. The other part of this bill is it forces part of the money to go to property tax reductions. Anybody here had their property tax increase lately? Of course we have. All of us around the state. As it's shifted from natural resource taxes to homeowners and businesses, this bill allows the electorate in their own hometown to be able to tax tourists to help pay for the property tax increases that we have all received. So hopefully we can stabilize those property taxes and maybe even reduce them. So you can see the percentage that's required in this bill that would have to go to property tax reductions. There's an efficiency in rebates because if you are a vendor or small business that's taxed under this bill, you're allowed to keep 4% as the cost of your time for doing it. So we haven't just tried to take advantage of those small businesses and force them to collect a tax. We give them money back for the time that they're required to actually collect the tax from those consumers. We've also targeted in there as to what is going to be taxed. And I'll find it here in a second.
Page
Oh, it's on the bottom of the first page. Excuse me. I would know that a little better. But you can see that we're the lodging facilities, the campgrounds, meals prepared for off-site or on-site consumption. Excuse me, alcoholic beverages. All of the things in the next page is a few more things that tourists use. So the object of this bill is not to tax the locals, even though some locals will be able to will pay for some of these things as well. But we I think generate about $30 million a year in terms of tourists coming from out of state. Why are we not taxing those people? Why aren't they paying for our police and our fire and our other parks and other services that they use, the roads? We should be making them do that. So the object of this bill is to really, with that local control, be able to allow the local government to control their own destiny. And I think when you say the bill also allows local governments to either have the boundaries be the city, or they can define how they want the boundaries to be. So it can be a different boundary in the bill than the actual city boundaries. Secondly, for Frenchtown, for Lowell, Sealy Lake, they're not incorporated communities. This bill actually allows for the sharing of some of the local option tax money to go out to those jurisdictions so that they would be able to share in some of the tourist monies that are coming through. And I think that's an important part of this process because then it allows for them to believe that the local option tax, I think, is a doable option that they might want to do it themselves. It's not regressive in the sense that it's going to tax poor people more than high-income people, because I think you're taxing tourists, they're going to be expecting to spend that money anyway. So I hope you support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then,
now their opposition, Jason.
And normally then any proponents that wanted to say, okay, 15, 20 minutes to proponents, they would come up and do the bill. After that, say, boom, you're done, opponents.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee about this significant, if not important, bill that you're facing. You've heard a lot of things that this bill will do, and I think you haven't heard everything that it's going to do. So I need to address some of the things that have been brought up and explain how this is going to actually work. So the first thing you need to understand is that there is going to be tax relief in this, right? So 20 cents of every dollar that's collected is going to go back to local property taxpayers as a rebate. But that's 20 cents of every dollar, and after you take out the 4%, you're getting 19 cents of tax relief for every dollar that's going into taxes. So that doesn't really sound like tax relief to me. That sounds like an 81-cent tax increase for every 19 cents I'm getting back. So this sounds like a tax increase to me. It doesn't sound like tax relief. Maybe that's not a bad thing, right? Maybe it takes money to fund government services. No one's going to argue that. It's a question of where it comes from and what's a reasonable amount. Well, the cities and towns would have you believe that they just don't have any access to revenue, that they're strapped for cash. Well, the numbers don't show that out. Between fiscal year 04 and 09, Billings saw a 25% increase in its gross revenues, total revenues. Helena saw a 20% increase. Kalispell and Bozeman saw over 70% increases in their total revenue between FY 04 and 09. I mean, the jurisdictions that are coming to you and saying they need this power, they have the power tax, and they don't appear to be shy about using it. So beware about giving it. The proponents would have you believe that this is targeted, and it is limited as to the things that it can tax. So one of the things that it can tax is it can tax rental cars. Well, you think, well, who uses rental cars? Tourists. Well, that's not exactly true. I don't know if anybody here is in the rental car business, but I know that last year, Enterprise Rental Car rented 48,441 rentals to residents of Montana. Those are replacement vehicles for people whose cars run to shops. Those are, and they're fleet rentals for business purposes. So we're going to pile on to the tax burden of these Montana companies. They're trying to do business with other Montana companies in the name of trying to fleece some tourists on the way in. I don't know. So there's a local control argument, and I think that's a very appealing. It's a very appealing thing for us to talk about local control. As you all know, the Department of Revenue is a hefty-sized department at the state level. Local control really means local administration. Local administration means local bureaucracy. So, implementing this bill really just means proliferating the amount of bureaucracy. So you're already down to, you got the 19 cents that you're rebating to the property taxpayer. You got the 4% that's going to the people who are collecting this. There's 23%. You got 35%. It's being distributed to the counties, and then you're going to have the administrative expense of running this thing if you're a city or town that's adopted it. So, I'm not sure that it's going to be the cash cow that the proponents hope that it will be. I do know that it will at least create some jobs in the public sector. So that's good. And so there's another thing that we got to understand about how this is targeted, right? When we talk about tourists, we like to imagine people from California coming to enjoy our great natural beauty, and we want to get them when they're buying their wine and their steaks and things like that. Well, that's true, but there's a significant group of people who go to the cities to shop, whose purchases would potentially be impacted by this, and those are the rural folks in Montana. And they're going to be going into these cities, and when you get out to eastern Montana, you're talking about areas that are big enough that people are coming from areas that aren't even going to see any of this redistribution to the counties. So you're going to be increasing taxes on farmers and ranchers who are coming into the cities for the weekend, to do their shopping, to come to their kids' basketball tournaments and things like that. Isn't it hard enough to make a living as a farmer and rancher in Montana? Do we really need, again, to be piling on when those people aren't going to see any kind of tax relief? So once again, it's targeted, but it's not as targeted as we think. And I'm a hunter. I believe you ought to see what you shoot before you pull the trigger. Let's be aware of that. So finally, I think it's hard enough to make it in some of these businesses without us piling on specifically to them, right? We're talking about restaurants, so tavern owners, people selling meals. It's hard to get one of those businesses started. They go out of business all the time. Why are we piling on to them? And outfitters, it's the same way. I mean, how many of you know outfitters that are living high on the hog? Like these are tough professions to make, and simply because they're used by out-of-staters doesn't mean we should go after the in-staters that are making a living. And finally, I think we do have to address the fairness issue. I've heard that it's not going to be regressive. I think any way you shine it, when you have a sales tax, that the less you make, the more of your income goes to that tax. So if I make $10,000 a year and I spend five of it on things that are taxable under this, that means that if the 1% tax, I'm going to spend $50 a year on paying this tax, and that's going to be about 1/2 of 1% of my income. If I make $100,000 and I spend $30,000 on the things that are taxed by this, the portion of my income that I spend on it that is spent paying this tax is going to be much smaller. People who are going to feel the pinch are the people who are already pinched the most. You got to think about that anytime you give somebody the power to use a sales tax to raise revenue. So, in summary, I got to say this is, it's wrong for a rural state. It's not as targeted as it seems to be. You might be hitting the wrong people. It's wrong for the businesses that we have here. They're Montana businesses that rely on Montana customers. and we can't afford to make their work any harder for them. And it's really not needed given the steady growth that we have seen in the revenues that local governments already have. So I urge you to vote no.
The difficulties and the challenges facing our valley. Pretty excited for this next exercise because, like Mike was talking about, the 62nd legislative session is taking place right now. But we're actually going to bring a little taste of Helena right here to your seats. You folks are going to serve as legislators in Helena. We're going to introduce a bill here on the floor. Mike Halligan will come out introducing the bill and will be in support of it. You'll hear opposition from Jason Weiner on the bill. After that, you'll have time to ask questions from each of the presenters. And then after that, we'll go into subcommittees where you will discuss the bill and just decide if you're going to vote out of committee and onto the floor as a whole. And then if time allows, then we'll actually deliberate it on the floor. So it'll kind of put you in the hot seat again today for the second time. We've already introduced Mike Halligan, but I did want to give Jason Weiner an introduction and thank them both for being here today. Jason represents Ward 1, as you probably know, for the City Council. He's also the chair of the Public Works Committee, chair of the Missoula County Democrats, and somehow in his spare time he runs a computer repair business. Like most Montanans, he loves snowboarding, cooking, spending time on the river. Jason, Mike, thank you both very much for being here today, and just an early round of applause for your guys' support. I also want to stress that the positions that they're arguing for you are just for the benefit of this exercise. They do not necessarily believe what they are advocating in opposition to. Feel free to visit with them further about their true views, but I didn't want anybody to feel kind of slighted on that. And we'll be getting a bill introduced around the floor for you guys to take a look at here, but in the meantime, we'll get Mike up here to introduce the bill to us.
I think what I want to do is wait until they actually get the bill because it'll make more sense there. So let me just, prior to a bill as important as a local option tax, which is the bill that we're going to hear, that I'll present, obviously I would have lined up local governments, Chamber of Commerce, any other business groups. I would have gone and done everything I can to make sure that after my testimony in bringing this bill in front of the committee, that when they say, are there any proponents for the bill, that I already have orchestrated who's going to testify after me. All right? Everyone does that. They want to make sure they get the most effective testimony there. Now, on real controversial bills, where you've got lots of people testifying, and this potentially could be one of them. It's like a sales tax. It generates a lot of ire on both sides. So you'll have probably the whole place will be packed in the galleries and the committee hearing. And when they say proponents come and testify, sometimes somebody, and they'll say, okay, you got a half an hour total for all of proponents. So I may have 8 or 9 proponents that I have orchestrated, that I've got relatively nearby. They're sitting in chairs just like this. But what if you come over from Missoula, and all of a sudden, you get to the podium before one of my guys do, right? You may take up 15 minutes of the time that the chair has said you've got for the entire proponents. I can't control that. And so it's a very important part of the process that if you are presenting a bill, and you've got to make sure that your people are there to support that bill, the wild card is the public gets to be there too. And if you, as much as you want to orchestrate who's coming next at the podium, make sure that they know they've got 2 minutes. That's about what you'll ever have in the legislature, is about 2 minutes. There may be somebody who just absolutely just walks in out of nowhere and gets up there before one of your people does and takes the rest of the time. And the chair's the gavel goes down. So, okay, we're done with proponents. Now we're going on to opponents. And half your people haven't testified. That happens all the time. So what happens then is the chair may say, I'll let those people who have not testified, who are in support of the bill, or those that are opposed to the bill that didn't get a chance to testify, at the appropriate time get up and say their name and where they came from and who they might represent. That's it. They don't get to testify, but they can submit something for the record. And so when you're asked, or you decide to go over to Helena to testify on a bill, you are lucky to get 2 minutes. And you may, if you take more than that, be taking some very valuable time from other people who will testify on that bill or against that bill. So if Jason was one of the opponents on this bill, and he's from a major association or from something else, he and I likely would have talked. he would come to me as the senator or the representative and say, Mike, I'm going to oppose your bill. You know, I just don't like it. I've never liked it, and here's why. So, I mean, there's a lot of courtesy and professionalism in the legislature. It isn't just people trying to show up and cut somebody off their knees. He would have said, you know, we don't like it. We're coming. We're coming with everything we've got. So, anyway, I think you need to take maybe 3 or 4 minutes and just read some of the basics of this, just so you have a little bit in your head, because we'll want to refer to that. So let me just shut up a minute and let you do that.
1980 to 2002. So we have some great information to share with us about our Montana legislature and how that connects with the community of Missoula. Thank you very much, Mike, and welcome.
All my degrees are from the University of Montana. I got out of the service in 1971, and I was looking for a place to go to school, and I was sitting in the Archer's Bar in building, which is like the Stockman's here in Missoula. And I saw a friend of mine's parents, and I said, well, where's Randy, which was a high school friend of mine? Well, he's up in Missoula. Even though I grew up in Montana, I'd never been to Missoula. So a couple of weeks later, dropped my wallet up, pops his note with his name on it. So it's getting towards September. I better call and find out. So I called, and I didn't know where he was at. He said, yeah, I'm at the Sigma Chi fraternity house out on the sun deck with a keg of beer and a bunch of women. That's where I'm going to college. I mean, nothing to do with the academic institution at the time. And so it was one of those things that, thank God, you know, at least I got here, because I love Missoula. It's just really fun being part of the different aspects of Missoula as I've gotten to experience them. Most of you will not really have much to do with the legislature formally, and that's a good thing. You know, but when you do have to be involved with the legislature, it's usually a very targeted experience, something where some bill comes up that will affect your livelihood or affect your family or be important enough to you to where you need to have access to. So when I do the little things like this, I try to do it in a way that gives you enough information to be able to make you dangerous about accessing the system, about accessing the legislature. So you can use it not just for this session, even though in the back, as you'll see, some of the pictures of the Missoula area delegation, which includes any district that touches Missoula County. I've got their names, addresses, and phone numbers, and contact information there. But absent that, the rest of this you can use just about any time. It'll fit 10 years from now. It'll fit, 5 years from now. So that's kind of the way I approach it. And I always like to include something about laboratories of democracy on the front, just to remind you that when the founders were kind of ruminating about, the federal system, the states were supposed to be the laboratories of democracy. That's where the mud, the blood, and the beer happens. That's where you may look at those 2,000 bills that are being submitted and wonder, what in God's name are they doing up there? Well, that's all of people just like you have requested something from their legislator, who now has submitted a bill draft request, and that's what's going on. It's that turning of the system of citizens having input into it, and only 500 to 550 of those 2,000 bills will eventually become law. If you look at the history of the last 30 or 40 years, no matter how many bill drafts, about a third end up becoming law. And so it's the culling of the herd happens all through the process. And this time you've got Republicans controlling the legislature, and you've got a Democratic governor. So there'll be some interesting kind of things that happen there in terms of dynamics of whether vetoes will occur, whether the executive branch staff will work with the legislature on various issues, from appropriations all the way to taxation to environment to regulatory things. So let me just talk a little bit about, if you are sitting there and the boss walks in, or maybe you're the boss, and some association you're a member of said, hey, we need you to be over to a hearing. We need you to participate in the process. Or for you to be effective in your current position, how can I show people in my business that I know what I'm doing? And that's a little bit of what I'm going to try to do here, is give you enough skills to be able to be effective from day one. And so I want to tell you about who's there first. And so if you looked on page 1 of who's there, you're going to see that there are very few women in the legislature. We're 50 to 51% of the population, but if you looked at the gender in the House of Representatives, 28 out of 100 are women. Right? If you looked in the Senate, only 7 out of 50 are women. So right there, you've got a little difference in kind of who, they're not representing the general population like we are here today. So you got to know that. If you're going to be testifying, who are you going to be testifying to? Well, you look down below a little bit, and the median age of Montana is about 39. A lot of people here are pretty much maybe a little bit younger than that, but around there, you know. In the legislature, it's about 55. And again, most of those are men. So if you're thinking about how they're going to vote on particular issues, you've got to know. You should be smart to walk in the door. Okay, that's what I'm doing. Now, what are the occupations? Now, the occupations are not rocket science, because we had to try to take it from the bios that they put in here, and some of them don't put their occupations in there. And I've got another book that is not available to the general public. You have to buy some of them. Lawmakers of Montana. It's essentially that book, only it's got bigger pictures and longer bios. And I use this like a Bible before I ever walk into a committee hearing. I make sure I have read this at the bio of everybody on that committee. So in case somebody asks me a question, I kind of know, oh, that's so-and-so from Sydney. You know, I know they're a Republican or a Democrat. So that has the same information, just a little bit shorter version. And that's something that we have committee hearings in there. It's going to have other little bios, contacts, telephone numbers for the legislature if you need to call. It's got a lot of very good information in there as well. So if you look at the occupations, though, 10 years ago when I was giving this speech to Leadership Missoula, there was virtually no one from the nonprofit sector who ran for office, or from the government sector or whatever. And I've tried to ask the people that get the demographics at the legislative level when after the elections and they go over to Helena and they're doing their caucuses and they fill out their biographical information, we're trying to get them, have them be more specific as to what their occupations are so that we can actually see who's there. And when they say government, I don't know whether that's state or local or what, you know, but now there's more people. If you start up with I tried to make these bigger, but we just couldn't with the page. So the black is where it starts, and it goes around the circle that way. So if you can't really tell, my eyes are bad enough, but you know, the red, business and finance, you know, 15 to some percent. I mean, you can see the different percentages that are represented there. And I don't know whether that represents Missoula as we know it or Montana as we know it. We know that ag has declined considerably. It used to be that about 40% of the legislature had agriculture, farmer, rancher as part of their occupation. Now that is down considerably, obviously, with the loss of the family farm and more people moved to urban areas and that sort of thing. So you're seeing more and more that the government sector, people who are actually sitting state or local government employees running for office, or people who are running nonprofits. There are obviously more nonprofits providing more services in the state of Montana, and more of those CEOs. Recently, just Ellie Hill from Missoula, CEO of Poverello Center, ran and won a seat to the legislature, and that's happening all over the state of Montana. So education, you can see they are relatively well educated over there. If you looked at some of those with graduate degrees, I mean, 30 in the House, 24 in the Senate, so 30 out of 100, 24 out of 50. There's only 49 right now. There's normally 150. There's normally 50 in the Senate, but John Brueggemann out of Polson, a senator up there, Republican senator, resigned about 3 weeks ago, and they have not filled that replacement yet. And so our numbers are going to be off by one, but there normally should be 50 senators. They'll replace him here in the next week or so. But the legislature is going on without a representative from Polson right now because they haven't selected the person. So the next page, I'd like to try to at least give you some appreciation. If you grew up in Montana, maybe you had some Montana history about this, but we have one of the finest constitutions on the face of the earth. And I'm not making that up. It's one of in 1972, you know, we just finished all the volatility of the 1960s, the Vietnam War, all the social upheaval and those kinds of things. We've been run by the Anaconda Company and the Montana Power Company for a long, long time. And a lot of that, the stress and the trauma that was going on in the 60s and the 70s ended up in our Constitution. And so when it comes to, right, in the first one, Article 1, the right to know and the right to participate. There's maybe 3 or 4 other constitutions in the United States of other states that have the absolute right to participate and right to know in their constitutions. So when you go to Helena, there isn't a door you can't go in other than if there's a personnel matter going on, every door is open to you. You have access to that information. Public participation and public right to know, documents that normally would never be available in most other states, you have access to. So a lot of the warts of the system in Montana are going to be there for everybody to see. So there isn't a closed meeting over there during the legislative session. Not one. And so that's a very important part that you need to know. And it's a good part of it. It used to be, and we'll get to the little bill draft section, where I could submit a bill draft if I wanted to see going in a little bit on the sales tax or something like that, something controversial. That used to be secret. I used to say, I don't want that out to anybody until I finally get the bill all the way to where I want it, and then if I want to spring it, sometime during the session, I could do that. Then I could, line up all my supporters and make sure the people who were going to be opponents didn't have a chance. Can't do that anymore. There's been enough court decisions that have interpreted that public right to know that as soon as that bill draft goes in the hopper, as soon as that legislator signs it, says sales tax in Montana and signed by some legislator. That goes into the system and you can see it. And I'll show you when we do a little bit of the PowerPoint presentation. But that's a very important part of the process in terms of accountability for the system. Second one is something that you should know too. That in Montana, unlike, I think, every other state, that when a bill is submitted, it is one subject clearly expressed in the title. Now, in Congress, you've heard about riders after riders on top of bills that you never know what could be inside a bill. Can't do that in Montana. Okay? The only bill is the appropriations bill that funds all the state government. That has all the funding there. That's one bill out of 2,000 that is different. The rest of them, if you submit a bill saying, I want to do a sales tax in Montana, you can't put something about the environment or something about local government or whatever it is. It's got to be a single subject within the title of the bill. So why is that good? So that you can say, Halligan, when you came home, how did you vote on that sales tax? I say, well, it had about 5 or 6 other things in there. No. How did you vote on the sales tax? Straight up or down, yes or no? And so that's, when you ask them how they voted, that's exactly what you get, is what they voted, how they voted on that particular bill. And again, most other states don't have that in there. And largely they did that because back when the Anaconda Company and the Montana Power Company, not to diss those companies, but they ran the show. They wrote the bills for the legislature. They wrote them. And so they didn't know, there was no public input hardly at all. They just would say, okay, this is what we want done, and they would go through. So all this, and they'd be complicated. So when the farmers came in, they said, listen, we want to be able to understand. We don't want a lawyer telling us what a bill says. And so now it's going to be very clear what it says. The right of privacy, the federal Constitution, the United States Constitution does not have the right of privacy in it at all. So that it does not. It's been interpreted by the courts to have it in there. But Montana's Constitution has a specific right of privacy. And the reason that's important is they've had court decisions on all of our personnel records, our telephone records, and a lot of other things related to business, but there really hasn't been much Supreme Court decisions on our personal rights of privacy in our homes, with our families, and that sort of thing. So there's abortion issues are going to be big this session. Most will pass probably, and those will end up in our court system. So at some point in the next couple of years, we're going to get a chance to see what our specific right of privacy means in our Constitution, because the court won't be able to avoid it, because people will take it to court. We're required to have a balanced budget. Most states have that provision. That's nothing new, so the revenues have to at least meet the expenditures. And they'll do that whether they're Republican or Democrat, it's required. There already is a provision in our Constitution that if there's ever a sales tax, it can't be more than, 4%? Yeah. So a lot of people don't know that passed about 10, 12 years ago. That people who hated the sales tax wanted to make sure if there ever was one, it's never going to be more than 4%, or if you want to raise it above 4%, it's got to go back to a vote of the people. So just a provision that just kind of got stuck in there. Clean and healthful environment, that there's no other Constitution that I'm aware of has something in the preamble of the Constitution so that we all are entitled to a clean and healthful environment. And the court has kind of danced around what that really means, and there'll be some more decisions coming out on it. It's a provision that most other states don't have, but it came out of, again, the Anaconda Company and other companies, trying to pull their weight around or push their weight around. That there was a real stress on environmental laws back in the early 70s, late 60s, and that's where that came from. And the right of individual dignity kind of dovetails with the right of privacy. So, there's, if you haven't read the Montana Constitution, kind of the preamble and the Bill of Rights that are in there, we have juvenile rights specifically stated, so that kids who are under the age of 18 have specific rights, just like adults that normally are not in any other state's constitution. But that's what is in our Montana Constitution. So I don't want to spend much time with how an idea turns into law, other than I want to kind of work with the next page. See, this little page is blank almost. You think it's complicated to be able to submit a bill. So if prior to the session, or even right now, there's still time to be able to do this, you said, you know, what do we think we want to have for a bill? Are you going to change the real estate laws or something like that to allow a real estate transfer tax, so that when rich people sell their homes, so make it over $300,000 or $400,000 for a home, that they have to pay a certain amount. All you have to do is say to the legislator, I want a real estate transfer tax on homes that appraise over $500,000. That's all they'd have to write on here. They would sign it and give it to the objective, professional legislative staff that's over in the Capitol. That's the staff available for all the legislators, Republican or Democrat. You never know whether they're Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative. This staff is very good, very professional. They will do all the research, they will do all the work, and they'll draft the bill for you. So that bill then, after the idea came on this one little piece of paper, goes to the legislator that signed it, and then that legislator will have indicated on here, well, Mary Smith is really the person who wanted me to do this bill, so Mary's name will be listed over here, or Joe Smith, who also is interested in this bill. So I want you to contact them and send it to them to make sure this is what they want. So I've submitted a lot of bills in my day from a lot of business people, a lot of just private citizens. And so when I get the bill, I call them up and say, okay, I've got the bill. I'm going to send it to you to make sure you read it. If this is what you want, this is what's going in. And so you get a chance to interact with the person who said, yeah, I want to change the law in Montana and the public policy to be a certain thing. Well, it starts out with this, again, this real generic idea. It gets way down into a bill that you'll actually end up submitting. And so it's a good interactive process. And in many cases, what happens is, like the sales tax this time, boy, you had a good idea, let's do a sales tax. And boy, after people have looked at that on the system, again, it's available to all of you and everybody in the state of Montana to be able to look and see, Halligan submitted a bill to do a sales tax. Why would you do something that stupid? They will call you and tell you, this is a bad idea. Don't be doing this. And so during the time that little idea got put on a piece of paper, and the time that bill, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, actually comes up and is handed to the legislator, who gets it to the private citizen, they too maybe have had second thoughts. And so it doesn't get eventually submitted into the Senate or the House. So to get a bill submitted, it has to be a senator or a representative actually saying, yep, this is the bill I want, handed it to work, and in the process it goes. Whether it's a House bill in the House or a Senate bill in the Senate. But as you'll see on the map, 2,000 bill drafts are in. Over 2,000. Most of those will never get in, because people will have second thoughts. It's not a very good idea right now to do that. And that's a good thing. At least a citizen had a chance to think about something, and then they get a chance to maybe have somebody submit it for them, and then they see kind of what the public has said about it. They have second thoughts, and maybe I'll refine that over the next 2 years, and I'll come back to you again. I've had that happen many times. You say, I think I want to wait, work on it, and go out to different associations that I work with. Maybe we can make this look a lot better in 2 years and actually get people to support it. So it's a big deal once these things now are all public, these bill drafts. Because before I got here, I went on the bill draft system to see what might affect the Washington companies, let's say the railroads. I wanted to see what was in there. It's wide open. I could see what bills are in, and then in the second section, what LC draft, the Legislative Council, that professional staff is doing a draft. I want to see who's got a bill draft in that might be regulating railroads in some way. And then I can see, oh God, that's submitted by so-and-so out of Sydney. I can call them up and say, what are you thinking here? Because there won't be a draft of the bill yet, it's still in drafting. So I can say, what are you thinking? And they'll tell me what they're thinking. Yeah.
If you use the law system and you search, say somebody's name for a bill, will the bill draft show up as well?
It will, but in many cases, because they go in stacks, first come, first serve, right? First one in, first one out. So if it's not drafted yet, it'll just say LC 150, whatever the bill is, and there won't be any body of the bill behind it because they haven't drafted it yet. So that's why you've got, if you see somebody in a hallway and say, I just see on here where you've got a draft in to change the law here. What are you thinking? You got a bill draft yet? Do you have anything I can see? They say, no, it isn't drafted yet, but here's what I'm thinking. And then you can kind of say, well, okay, that sounds good. Can I help you with it? Or, you know, this is not good. I'm going to be opposed. Yes.
Mike, could you explain the concept of placeholders that happen early in?
The question is the concept of placeholders. You know, a lot of legislators, you know, will submit a bill draft, let's say to revise environmental laws. That's a real broad title. And I already mentioned that one subject issue. So anything affecting the environment could be in that bill. But I may want to submit a bill because one of my constituents has called me and said, listen, I'm thinking about something on environmental stuff. I may want to change water quality laws. And so could you just put a placeholder in for me? So I will have submitted a bill draft signed by me, revised environmental laws. And so if you went on the system, looked under Halligan, looked under what it was, you'd see revised environmental laws. Call me up and say, what are you thinking? You say, I don't know yet. This is a constituent I did this for. And so I'll bet you 30% of the bill drafts in right now, there's a ton of them, will just be revised, generally what tax laws, environmental laws, labor laws, you know, because they don't know what they want to do yet. And you know, if you're strategically, if you're a Republican or a Democrat this time, the Democrats are way in the minority, you know, they're going to wait and see kind of what the Republicans are doing in different areas, and they've got these general revised laws too. They may want to submit a counter bill of sorts to try to offset, so they've got, you know, some strategy going on in terms of how they're going to handle the appropriations process, or maybe some taxes or things like that. So, but the placeholders are important because after a while you may need them if you've forgotten something. It might be something in workers' compensation because we have the highest rates in the nation. They go a certain group, and all these bills are in, and you're hearing, and all of a sudden they realize during a hearing, well, we don't have a bill on to do this. Well, we should be doing that. Well, does somebody have a placeholder? So you go back into the system, look and see whose name is on it, and grab that legislator, give it to anybody in the legislature to submit, and then that bill can get in the process. I remember when I was, you know, over there, it was almost all the way through the session. Actually, it was before about halfway through the session. And the heart doc, Carlos Duran, was walking in the hallway with Connie Erickson, his administrative assistant. And the International Heart Institute was every year, I think, at St. Pat's, right? And they were coming by, and I kind of barely knew them, and I was getting a bill draft for somebody, and I stood there and I said, well, hi, how's it going? You know, and they had a glum look on their face, and I said, what's going on? Oh, it's too late to submit a bill draft, and we just found out that those docs, those famous docs that come into town to show us procedures, can't even practice. We've been violating the law because they can't practice because they aren't certified in Montana. And I said, so we've been told now we're going to have to not have the institute unless we change the law. We got to come back in 2 years to do it. I said, well, have you found out if there's a placeholder? Is there a bill draft that's broad enough in that title to include what you want to do? So I said, let's go downstairs. So we went down to the chief legal counsel of the legislature, objective, professional guy. I said, Greg, have we got a bill draft in to help these people? Here's their issue. Oh, absolutely. We had two Republican bills. You know, I was a Democrat, but it didn't make any difference. This was not a partisan bill, and most of the bills aren't. And so I went to the first legislature and said, absolutely. Here's where the bill is. It's in a committee. You know, go ahead and amend it to do what you need to do. So we got it done. You know, and the Republican carried the bill, got that part of it done. But it's, you know, sometimes now with term limits, those legislators won't understand that you can do those things. That you can help people out, get things done, actually solve real problems. Just because you're not abuse the system, but make sure it's, again, within the title of the bill, and then get something done for the constituent. So the last thing I want to deal with here, before I show a little bit of the PowerPoint stuff, and talk a little bit about contact legislators, is just lobbying the legislature. And I know this may sound obvious to you that everybody has their individual way of doing things. There's no question about that. But telling the truth is the most important thing. You think that's an obvious thing? Well, you're going to get asked questions that are just right on the edge of things that you may know or may not know. And I guarantee you want to say, I don't know the answer to that question. If somebody asks you and you don't really know it, but I will find it out if I can, and I will get back to you. And so if you're in a committee and you're up at the podium and somebody's asking you questions, and all of a sudden they get you one that you just haven't got quite the statistics or the data or the answer on, you absolutely say, I don't know the answer to that question, Senator or Representative, but I'll get that back to you. And they'll say, okay, how do you want it? I'll send you a letter to that effect or whatever it is. So honesty, the best policy. Don't embellish on anything. Because if you do that, they will remember that and your credibility is gone forever. And so I know that lobbyists are the most hated profession out there, next to probably lawyers. But I guarantee you, our word, and you know, is our bond as a lobbyist. So we will never stretch the truth. Absolutely not any time. So, you know, there's a lot about lobbying people don't like. I mean, I'm from one of the biggest companies, obviously in Montana. I don't ever spend a dime taking people to dinner or buying them coffee or anything, because it's just not something we do. You know, and if you spend more than $25 on any given legislator for a meal, if lobbying rules are the very low threshold. So I've got to report their name and the restaurant we went to and how much was spent. So if I take 3 to lunch or 3 to dinner or whatever it is, it's over $25 individually for each one, then I've got to report that. You know, I don't want to do that. They don't want to do that. They don't want to see that they went out to lunch or dinner with me. So I know that that's something that when I was in, I didn't care if I ever went to dinner or lunch with anybody. You know, I just wanted to be able to give me the information right now. I mean, I don't need to be at dinner with you to do that. And most of the legislators are all very hardworking people. They're citizens, just like you, who just happen to get elected, and now they want to, you know, serve the people. So talk to them there, buy them a cup of coffee. They don't even want that probably, but they're very skittish of anybody, even you. And when you walk up, you're going to say, "My name is so and so. I'm just a private citizen from Missoula, and I'm from St. Patrick's Hospital, and I need to talk to you about this." You know, and so they'll want to know. Identify yourself immediately. And for guys like me or lobbyists, professional lobbyists, I've got to wear a badge. Everybody who's a registered lobbyist has to wear a badge so that people know who you are. All right, and who you're with. And we would do that anyway. So whenever you get up to a podium, you say, my colleague and I work for the Washington companies, and I'm here representing them today. And here's my issue. So it's a very open process in that regard. And there's a lot of registered lobbyists because the threshold is very low to register. So if you spend 5 or 6 days over there and your salary is $75,000 a year, and you allocate part of your salary to the time that you went over there lobbying for those 5 or 6 days, it may reach $2,450, which is the threshold. Then you have to go register as a lobbyist. You have to be one of us, one of the bad guys. Okay? So I guarantee you there's a lot of nonprofit leaders, a lot of agriculture, education, plumbers, you name it, are registered lobbyists over there. And it's at least 3 or 4 or 5 to 1. But they're not all in the hallways at any given time. So there might be, of the 150 legislators, you might have 75 to 100 lobbyists roaming the hallways at any given time, depending on the bill. Now, if the MEA is having a big convention for the day, and you're going to have 1,000 teachers in the hallways, things change a little bit. They're not registered lobbyists, but things change by the day. So the other parts of this little narrative piece that I want you to remember is that the legislature is a long-term process. So as most of us in our business world, we've got to get things done with a defined deadline, and here's what the boss is expecting, and boy, you're used to that. Now, you walk up to a legislator and say, listen, that subdivision law is absolutely absurd, that bill, and there's a provision in there, I've got to get it changed, can you help with that? And they say, no, I'm in support of this or that or whatever it is. You have got to just take it and be able to say, I respect your opinion, I really think that, here's the reason why you ought to change, but maybe next time. I mean, you've got to be as professional as you possibly can be, and usually it's emotional or value-based issues that you are disagreeing with people on. Because in a week, you may be back again, and that one person that you just disagreed with may be your only ally. You've got to know that they will remember you. So it's for you that may lobby particular areas or be engaged like real estate or subdivisions or local government issues. You're going to be talking, and they will get reelected. And even with term limits, people are reelected 85% of the time. And so those people will be back for that 8 years. And they'll remember if you were a jerk, they'll remember that. If you were professional, they will very much remember that, and they'll respect your opinion. Especially when you go back to, you say, we talked 2 years ago about this, and here's how we've changed this then. Can we work together on this? Oh, yeah, I remember you. Yeah, we can. So it's a long-term process. It's not something you should ever, even if they vehemently disagree with somebody, you've got to just let her go by. Just make sure that the last impression you have is one of a professional. Pre-session planning, it's too late now, but if you've got issues and you're working with nonprofit groups or other groups, and somehow, during the interim, after the session's over, they're home. They're home for 20 months and only in Helena for 4. Right? So it's every other year they get together. So I blew by that portion of it, which is on that second page. I'll just touch on it briefly. There's only maybe less than 10 states have every other year legislators, and that's a very good thing because they are so cautious about what they do in terms of budgeting that our budgets, we're one of the 2 states that has a balanced budget. Why would that be? Well, because we were conservative to begin with. They were conservative to begin with in terms of their revenue projections. Because can any of us budget for 2 years? It's impossible. But we require them to do it. And so they have to be very conservative. How much oil and gas money are we going to get in 2 years? How much coal? How much income tax? Business tax? I mean, it's just amazing how conservative they have to be so that then they budget pursuant to that 2-year period. So it's a good part about the process because they are citizens. In other words, they are home. So there's absolutely no excuse for you not to be able to contact a legislator in the unit. None. What you got to do if you don't know who they are, who's in your district, you just call the county. Ask for the elections office. They get the elections office, say, I live in so-and-so. Who's my representative and who's my senator? They'll give you the names and the addresses. You don't even have to do anything. They'll give it to you. Call them up, and you go have coffee with them. Say, here's what I'd like to do. And so then they can start the process 18 months before the legislature ever convenes if you work with them in the interim to get some things done. And in that time, you can be putting together your coalitions to whatever you want to do. If you want to get some major change in law, you can say, okay, who are the people that I need to partner with to be able to get something done? I gave you the pay there that they actually receive so that you'll be able to see that on page 2, way back on page 2. So, it's $10.33 an hour, which is what a prison guard gets. So it's pretty big wages. But, so it's 82, pardon? They can vote to increase pay, but not while they're not for their wages, for the next one. And they won't this time. I mean, there may be an inflationary thing that happens, but as far as this is the same number I checked just the other day, the same number I used 2 years ago. It hasn't changed, so there was no. But so if state government employees get a pay raise, legislators, because they're part of the pay plan, if they get a 1%, they'll get a pay raise as well. But they were frozen last time, so they didn't get a pay raise. And they also get per diem. So you're over there 8 hours a day for the 4 months you're there. During the 6 days you work, you get your pay, your regular your $10.33 an hour. But for 7 days a week, only for the 4 months or the 90 days that you're there, you will also get that per diem that's listed there of what's 105.31. So it ends up you're going to get a total of $18,811 for 4 months. Okay, that's a decent. That used to be $8,000 when I was in. And they've raised it considerably because people were not running because you could not afford to go over there. And I lived in hovels while I was there because you could not afford to set up 2 households. So now it's $18,000 for that 4 months. So they leave the legislature in April. April 21st is their last day. Their pay is done. Their per diem is done. They don't get any other wages unless they're on an interim committee. And so if they're on an interim committee, they go over for 1 day. They get $10.33 an hour for that, for the 8 hours that they're there. So that's the only. They don't get any more per diem or anything else. So they go back in session again. So their wages really are just tied 4 months every 2 years. So it's not a place you're going to make a lot of money. The other quote, if you haven't read that little quote right there on that page, back from 1850, is it Henry Clay, or 1855? I mean, politics isn't about ideological purity or moral self-righteousness. I mean, it's about governing. And you cannot govern unless you compromise. We all do it in our own families, our own households, our own give and take in businesses, that sort of thing. And I remember last session when there was a 50-50 House, I got to give the orientation, which I got lucky, and for the last 5 or 6 years I've given it to the freshman legislators who were coming in, Republicans, Democrats, House and Senate. And I said, the Senate was Republican by 28-22, but the House is 50-50. So if you are a Democrat or a Republican in the House and you want to get your bill passed, you have to have just one Democrat or just one Republican to get your bill through. If all the rest of your party goes with you. And again, most bills are not partisan. And if you looked at the 2009 session, tons of bills died on 50-50 vote. Because nobody went to, and if I were a constituent saying, I want you to do a particular bill, and it ends up dying on a 50-50, wait a minute, there's got to be middle ground somewhere. I mean, virtually everything there is. Why did all those bills die? I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they weren't looking, if you're a legislator, to go to somebody in the committee and say, well, what is it that you need for me to get that bill through? So now, with the Republicans controlling, even, I guarantee you, when the Democrats control, you think, okay, well, I've got Democrats or I've got Republicans in the majority of both houses. I guarantee you They don't look at the House and Senate act totally differently toward bills. And whether you're an R or an E going in front of a committee, they're going to look at the substance of a bill, see whether it's a good idea. They won't automatically think, well, R behind the name, whatever it is, it's going to go through. Not at all. So it's a good process in that sense, that everything is vetted very deeply. And again, because it's so open, it's ugly at times. But that's a very good part of the process. It's the strength of the process, not a negative. So,
Do I have until 2, or what's the question?
Quick question, just a practical question. So great, the pay, whatnot, but I mean, are people getting leaves of absence from their work? Or, I mean, I was trying to look and see what occupations were and things like that. And I assume if you're a farmer, maybe January through April is a good time to be in the legislature or something. But for a lot of people, I would think that would be difficult. And is that a disincentive for some people?
the question is, I mean, being able to get a leave of absence to be able to go to the legislature from your job. You know, in many cases, usually the owner of a business says, you know, it's great you got elected. You know, we may try this once, you know, and see how it works, see how much of your workload gets pushed off on everybody else. I know several lawyers in big law firms got elected, you know, and then it was about one session later that the principals came and said, you want to do it again? You're going to have to leave the firm. I mean, it's a ruthless process, and there's a lot of votes that you have to take. And so the question is, people do get leaves of absence, and the law allows you to be able to do that. If you're a public employee, definitely they can't fire you because you went to the legislature. So there's teachers that have been elected and other public employees. But a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses, cannot afford to have somebody gone, particularly one of the owners, maybe a spouse of somebody running a business too. So it's very difficult to be able to get that time off, because you have to be there 6 days a week, because they work on Saturdays. I mean, it's Monday through Saturday, all the way from the first Monday in January to about April 21st. So it's 90 legislative days if you don't include some Sundays in there. That's how you get to 90. Yeah.
We were talking about with 2,000 bills normally per session, and about a third of them go through. How big of a impact do lobbyists have on those third getting all the way to the end? Do they have an impact or not?
You know, I think probably the answer is yes to that. You know, but remember, lobbyists are a pretty broad term in Montana, because if you do just about anything, you've got to register. And so, if it's and there are so many with about 2,000 in. There are a lot of bills we don't care about at all. There might be 10 that we care about out of 2,000. And so those are the ones we're going to kind of work on. But I guarantee you, I mean, I got to appreciate after about 15 years in that when you had a bill, they asked for proponents, then they asked for opponents. That I used to appreciate. I used to hate the fact that I have opponents to my bills, whatever it is. But then I got to appreciate that, thinking that okay, these people felt comfortable enough to come in and say this is bad public policy and we shouldn't do it. And it was kind of fun then to be able to have the best proponents and the best opponents get up there and really go at it. And whether they're lobbyists, and in my case, I don't go in front of the podium usually at all. I try to bring, and this is a good advice for you, the legislature listens when you take the time to come over as a private citizen and testify. You are more powerful than I could ever be, I guarantee you. They want private citizen input. It means more to them than any lobbyist. So yes, we're there full time to be able to say, here's what my guy sent from, or the woman sent from Missoula when she came over and testified. I can help with that afterwards. But my job is to make sure the face of an issue is out there in real life in the neighborhoods and the communities and the business. And that's where lobbyists are more effective, is bringing the right people to testify. All we do is shepherd it from there. So what I wanted to show you, there's contact information on how to. I mean, again, all those numbers for the legislature haven't changed in 20 years. If you want to call, if you call and leave a message, you can leave a message for up to 5. You say, I'd really love to have Senator Erickson from Missoula give me a call back. They'll take that pink slip, go put it on Senator Erickson's desk in the Senate, and he'll have a stack there waiting for him. And so during the debate of the second reading in the legislature, when he's already looked at the list, sees bills that are just boring to him or whatever it is, I did the same thing. I said, I don't care about any of these bills, and I'll run in and vote when I need to, but I'm going to be making calls to people that have made calls to me. And virtually every legislator calls back to everybody. So you can expect to call. Make sure you give a range of times for them to reach you and your cell, so to make sure that you don't miss them when they do have a chance to do that. But they go into session from 1 to 3. So that's when they're actually confined in the body, just like this, and they can go use the phones, they can read the newspaper, they can read bills, they can do whatever they want. Lobbyists are not allowed in there at all, and it's a great time for them to get to know each other as well as, do their homework and listen to bills. But early on in the session, there's so few bills that are coming out of committee yet. They're all innocuous bills. There isn't anything important really coming out, that's there yet, because all those bills are waiting to be drafted, and they're going to be coming in here shortly. So then it's a good time where they'll go in, they'll hear a few bills, and then that's where I'm making phone calls, where I'm writing letters to constituents all day. So, the homepage of the legislature, it's just www.leg.mt.gov. And that's in here as well, so you don't have to write that down. So if you said, okay, I don't know who my legislator is, you can go find a legislator about the legislature bill. So, I thought, well, let's look at a bill so that you can see how easy that is. And so this 2011 session, past sessions, whatever it is that you want to use. So we want to have 2011 session. So, and it comes up, if you do know the bill number, then you just type it in that top section there. Now, in an LC draft, I'll show you what that LC is in just a second. So let's say we don't know what we really want. We want to look for something. So I went ahead and I said, let's look for Greg. So primary sponsor. And so I said, let's look up there. So here it gives you a list then of the legislators. And I saw where Greg Hinkle, just up here in T Falls, has a bill in to allow you to throw a spear to, you saw that in the paper maybe in the last couple of days. So I said, oh, let's just check that bill out. See what Greg's got.
Fish for the spear.
Spear
fishing. Spear fishing. You need bills for that.
Greg real quick.
Well, I think it's
Okay,
illegal.
so then it brings up Greg's name right down here. And so then we just click find.
If you can hit a fish with a spear, you go do it. All the spear guns are.
All right, so Greg, that's trained the
If you're
driver's
throwing
license.
spear, I can
All the
do that.
bills
Spear
right now,
guns are
the formal bills
fairly
he has
accurate.
introduced are at the top part of this page.
Not
Okay,
a spear,
these are the ones. So
an
let's
actual
see.
spear.
There's the one right there. One as well.
Provided
No,
the
these are
hand-thrown
actual
spear
bills.
is a lawful
All
means of
bills
A
he submitted.
hand-thrown
So
spear.
whether they're from constituents, whether they're his own ideas, I don't know.
awesome.
So,
Do it, man.
So he's obviously concerned more about fish and game issues, right? He's got some particular interest there. But let me just go down a little bit and show you. I have an electronic idiot, so having to do this. So I was hoping that he might have some that are in the LC stage, but they're all bills already. And so if we went over here and clicked on Senate Bill 112, it will give us the text of that bill. And it's not very much. So up here at the top, right, it's HTML or PDF, so you can click on there if you want the text. And it's already, on 111 it had a hearing, so that's why it was in the budget. So here is the bill, right here, right in front of you. Act providing that a hand-thrown spear must be considered a lawful means of hunting. So if this was a complicated bill, potentially you could call Greg up and leave a message on the floor. You've got this bill up right on your computer at work. And he could call you back right about then, and you could say, Greg, what about, making sure that somebody who does that, can't be using a certain kind of dog or something like that, or maybe there's some parts of this that you want to change. So you've got real-time, the bill up in front of you. He's had a hearing on it now, so it hasn't been voted on in that committee. Now, that committee could say, boy, this is bullshit. We're going to kill this bill. All right? I'm sorry. So this is not what we said. We're sent over here for, let's do something else, whatever. So the committee has full discretion then to vote no on the bill, and it stays in committee. All right? It's done. All right? Or he could go back, and if that happens, then he can go back and say, hey, what was wrong with it? You can talk to several members individually on the floor and say, how do I make this a better bill? I need this bill out of committee. My constituents really want this bill. And that happens a lot. I mean, you have a lot of pressure if you got a bill from your constituents to be able to get that bill out. And you say, listen, I'm not voting for that under any circumstances. So, he may get that to some people, or he'll say, hey, we don't care if it goes through, whatever. It's not going to hurt my urban constituents in Missoula. Greg, you want the bill? I'll vote for it, or something like that. it's, you know, this has not got a big constituency, I'm sure. It's good to be concerned about. So, and I don't mean to diss it. But, so let's maybe go back into past break here, get back to our normal. Okay, so let's do a reset quick. How close am I getting to time, by the way? And, you know, there's a lot of things in to amend the Constitution. And so I guarantee you, all of the lobbyists pre-session, we're on this page all the time, setting up our preference lists, looking at, you know, setting up lists, and below here, list all introduced bills, advanced bill searching, search, directory, whatever it is, establish a preference account, establish preference list, whatever it is. I and most regular citizens all over Montana have preference lists that we put our bills in, and we make sure that when I see a bill draft come in, I'll put it in there so that the system will update it for me and give me notices as to when hearings are all the way through. So once I get it in my preference list, I don't have to go back and monitor it. It'll tell me, alert, Senate Bill so-and-so, whatever it is going to be heard in the Senate, whatever it is, on a particular time. So I'll make sure you do that. So let's say we went to the subject matter. We want to find out, okay, who's trying to amend the Constitution? Okay. So it'll come back and say, okay, let's go. Constitutional amendment proposals. All right. Well, this is the last one we'll do, and then I think I got a break up or something. So then I want to find anything associated with amending the Constitution. The system gives me, okay, revised term limits through constitutional amendment. I looked at that one already, and they want to double. Right now it's an 8-year maximum that somebody can be there in one house. Then they can move from that house to the next house. They look at the Senate 8 years and then run for the House 8 years. That's done by maybe 4 or 5 legislators every year. There's some going back and forth with term limit. This would make it, I think, 16 years in one house, and you could potentially run 16 years in the other house. I'm not a fan of term limits at all. I think it's a good process, but I don't expect this to go anywhere. Constitutional amendment to allowing legislature to change retirement plans, So this part, so these bills, HB or SB, that means they're introduced in the legislature. They are there. They're wide open, and you can see the texts of those bills if you wanted to. These LC numbers are still in the drafting stage. So, my guess is, and it says, status of it, draft on hold by Greg Hinkle, then Constitutional Montana Sportsman's Heritage Amendment, draft ready for delivery. So, Diane Sands has one from Missoula to do a referendum to reform method of which Montana Supreme Court justice. A lot of people are mad that the justices are elected. They'd like to have them appointed. And so, that's something. So let's see if she has a text to that bill. You're probably more interested in it. So there is an actual text there. In many cases, the current HTML or whatever it is, or PDF, would not be there because it's too new. So,
What does LC stand for again?
Legislative Council, that's just the name of the staff. So LC, Legislative Council draft. So a bill for an act entitled to act submitting qualified electors of Montana, amendment, whatever, providing that the merit-based appointment of Supreme Court justice is followed by judicial performance evaluation. So if that passes the legislature, it doesn't go to the governor for signature. None of the constitutional amendments do. It would go directly then and be on the ballot in a year and a half. So there's probably 12 bills potentially by the end of the session. Some on abortion, some on environmental stuff, some on things like this, some on fish and game issues, whatever it is, maybe going out to a vote of the people. So that the people can do it by initiative. You go out and get, I think 27,000 signatures to amend the law, and it's about 38 or 40,000 signatures to amend the Constitution, then it goes on the ballot. They can do it by referendum here just by getting enough votes in the legislature to put it on. So, and if she doesn't get enough majority votes to get this through the legislature, it'll never be on the ballot. It's the same majority votes as anybody else has to do. So it's pretty easy, I guess, to be able to access anything going on with respect to the legislature. The last thing I'll do is we'll let you take a break here before we start the other part, is in that one section, you know, and if I went to the home page, I don't know, it does have it here. If you want to listen, you know, you don't have to go anywhere, right? You don't have to go to Helena. And in many cases, there'll be 10 things listed there. You get on that legislative homepage, you know, if I clicked on that, if you have some speakers, whatever it is, we'll be able to listen. Now, Senate taxation met at 8 a.m. They're not meeting anymore, so nothing would come up. But if you wanted every morning to get on and see what committees are meeting, you know, that little book that I gave you will show you, the little skinny one, will show you when the taxation committee meets, when the judiciary committee meets, and so you'll know that from 8 to 12 in the morning, judiciary's meeting. And if they're having a particular bill that deals with something that you're, you know, a constitutional amendment or something like that, you don't have to go to Helena. You can just plug it, just turn it. Your computer has the microphones or speakers. You can just listen.
So the legislators now over your text the session or the committee?
Yeah. So you can, I mean, and that's where I think it's important to be able to, you know, they won't have video. I mean, they do in the Capitol. And what I always do, when I go in the Capitol, I rarely go into a committee hearing because there are about 5 or 6 TVs around the Capitol that are public. You know, so down in the cafeteria, there's 2 or 3 of them, and they will have different hearings on them. And so I will go up and I'll find a spot that maybe no one's sitting at, you know, from the 3rd or 4th floor where there's a TV, and I will just click on, see, well, taxation's meeting, what do they do? I've got the list of the bills for the day. I know what they're going to hear. I want to see where they're at in the process. I'll look at maybe the appropriations process. So I could sit there and watch and listen what's going on. If I see something come up, and a lot of times the Washington companies are mentioned in those hearings. You know, somebody says, some legislator will say something that's wrong about us or whatever it is. So then I got to get off my butt. I got to get down into that committee hearing, and I got to go inside. And then when there is time for public input, whatever it is, proponents, and I didn't talk about that, but every bill has proponents. You know, we'll do that here shortly. That's why I kind of didn't do it now. Proponents, then opponents, and then the sponsor gets a chance to close some questions from the committee. So we'll do that with Jason, now that he's here in the back.
He's not kidding.
I told him to wear a tie.
Say something wrong, because I've done it, and I got a phone call the next day.
Are there any questions about the kind of mechanics of the process? I tried to make it not a civics lesson, but I just try to make you effective, you know, from your desk at your work, as opposed to having to go to help. All right, thank you very much.
$1,000 and a $500,000 deficit. He had none. Instead, administration says, no, we want to put that in the ending fund balance. It's been, in other words, at the end of every fiscal year, the city and the state have to have an ending fund balance of a certain percentage. The state's very, very concerned about that, and they do it. And we vote for a certain percentage, we stop on the spending. The city said, no, we'd like to take that $470,000 and build up our ending fund balance. Meantime, we'll go for a $500,000 assessment through these 2 taxing districts. Our concern about our lending, 4 of us that are generally the minority here, is that you could cut back elsewhere in city expenditures and probably make that up. You could take some of the money that just came from the state, in which you really don't have a deficit. You don't need these taxing districts. Well, it became clear they want these taxing districts. One, there's no cap. They can raise your taxes any amount they want. And in certain places they are now, there's no protest. And if your taxes go up for whatever reason because of these taxing districts, sorry, you can't protest it. So a simple majority on city council can raise the taxes to any level they think traffic will bear, and if they don't like it, it's too bad. And that's on private property, whether it's a business or whether it's on home or both. If you're a business person, you probably pay taxes 2 places. And the other thing about it is, not so many places there are now. If the city went down here and said, we want to put $17 million into a new park and playgrounds and whatnot at the fort, and we take out a loan for that $17 million, this could be the collateral for it. And it can't go away until our loans pay off. So, gotcha. And that's where this sits right now. Now, maybe that's going to go away. We've got some people over the state legislature saying, enough of this. This is not the way this was intended to be used. And we think we will see a bill come out. In fact, I think the bill is being introduced as we talk that will change a lot of that. And it'll put the power of putting a that kind of a system in place, but take it back to the people. The way it was here is and this is another thing that really irritated me, is the approval of this, to bring this to a vote, is not based on population. It's based on the valuation of the land. So if you're a business person, it's what's your property worth, what's your homeowner, what's your property worth. And it had to take 51% of the total valuation of the city of Missoula. And the law says all entities within these taxing districts, which happens to be the whole city, would all be treated identically. Which meant university, churches, schools, and everything else would be assessed. Now, after they put these districts in place, then the city council could say, we'll exempt certain properties. We'll take the university out of it, for instance, that's kind of thing. But the city went out ahead. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Bender went out to places like the President University and said, we're not going to tax you. He had no authority to do this. The law does not recognize the mayor's authority in any way. Because a lot of cities don't have a mayor, so it isn't even in the law. It has to be done after they're in place, and the legislative body, city council, can then say, okay, we'll take these different entities out. But until the law's in place, they can't do that. And I think the reason they wanted to get this out of here is probably a protest from the university would wipe it out. I mean, the valuation of the university probably obviously very high, and probably overwhelm all those people who wanted this. You had to have 51% of the valuation to do this. I think the university probably would easily carry that. So they did that. They had no authority to do it. In fact, the mayor still is not part of that, even though he wants to be. And that's where we're going with this. You're laughing. To me, it's why are we doing these things? I think we need to do things we need the money. No question, we need money in Missoula. I think we need to look harder at how we spend what we have. I think we could say we could cut some things out. Whether you like it or not, one thing that came up was, why do we have Missoula in motion? That ought to terrify some white people. But on the other hand, that's $350,000 a year that goes into that organization. What do we get for it? Some billboards. We get some effort to tell employers, to tell their employees to take the bus. I think the bus people handle it by themselves. We put several $1 million into that. I do not see anything on the ground that says we're getting our money's worth out of that. That never even got talked about. So we never really dealt with where we would cut city budget. And I think now, given the atmosphere at an environment at the federal level and the state level, I see some bad times coming for the city. I'm afraid it's going to hurt some things we don't want to hurt. You and I are concerned about Meals on Wheels. I just think some of those kinds of programs are going to get slashed, just because, not because anybody doesn't like it, but because there just isn't any money there. When it comes from the city, or from the state to the city, I think that's going to get reduced. I have no idea. I don't think it's going to be necessarily a political thing that just because they don't like Missoula. I think it's going to be just because there isn't bucks there. And I think we're going to hear more and more about that. So you and I need to hang on to our seat here. I work with this lady on the Missoula Aging Services. She does a fine job, and I'm pretty proud of that organization, but I think it's going to get hurt. Give you another example of how the city approaches some things. We had a lawsuit here recently over the Clarkfield Terrace, and I don't know if any of the attorneys are even paying attention to that. When we approved that subdivision as part of the approval, we said, okay, the trail around that is going to have that trail. And so, kind of, if we approve this, we get the right of way for the trail. Well, unfortunately, Montana has no law saying we can't do that. and hasn't had enough court cases to build up precedent. So that passed through city council. The law owner went back to or the landowner and the developer went to court and got a decision from Judge McLean that you can't do that. There's no nexus, i.e. the connection between the need for that trail and the development. And part of his reasoning was also a couple of cases on the national level. And I don't remember those were Supreme Court or local judges, but the one I remember in particular was on the coast of Oregon. And the authorities there told the developer, we'll approve your development if you give us the right of way for a road through here. The developer said, if I give you that right of way, you just kill my development. It went to court, and the court came back and says, there's no connection for the need for that road in the development. If you want that road, you have to pay for it. Either you go on the negotiated payment or go to court through the eminent domain and you can condemn it. And that's basically what Judge McLean, in fact, he quoted those cases in his write-up and said, if the city wants this trail, and I think the trail is a great location and a great need there, but the city needs to buy it. And the developer saying, you're not paying me, you're taking something away from me without making me whole. If you want to pay for this, we can talk about the payment, or else go to court through eminent domain and condemn it. In any case, the city would have to pay for it. No effort to do that. It's just a case of, you take it, if you want your subdivision approved, you've got to have this trail. When you look at the map, we need that. It's a good link for the whole trail system that's being developed out there as a result of the dam we've taken on and all that. I think it's good, but we need to go about it different. And again, I say a lot of things I think the mayor and administration and 8 people on council want to do are good things, but there's a way to do it, and do it right, do it properly, do it lawfully, do it ethically. And that hasn't been done. What else have I got here? I can quit any time you folks get sleepy and want to go home. I don't know. If you're not getting sleepy, then there's something wrong with you. I guess at this point in time, we're also concerned about where the money's coming next year. We've got some union contracts that are going to come due with some pretty high increases. Talking to some police officers, I think the police are saying next 2 years we want a 4% increase. They've already negotiated some of that, as I remember. I may not remember the figures correctly, but something similar with the fire department. We've got insurance premiums increase, as you all know, since they passed the health bill. A lot of insurance companies are saying we've got to have more money. Why? We're going to put people up to their 26 years old in the home and that kind of thing. Who's going to pay for that? Good process, or I mean, a good thought to do that kind of thing, but that has to be paid for. So I see insurance for the city coming up. And the city right now is paying most of it. For instance, I have city insurance. I don't need it. The reason I took it is they're only charging me $5 every pay period. How many of you here didn't buy on health insurance at $5 every 2 weeks? Ain't happening, is it? And my thought was, why don't we raise the premiums on employees and not to help offset some of that? And we don't want to do that for employees. Well, if you don't want to do it, somebody has to pay for it. So the taxpayers are going to pay for it. And I think that's going to get turned around. I don't have any problem. I have other insurance and I'm paying like $300 or $400 a month on it. And at $5 a pay period is ridiculous. Yes, ma'am.
Do you mind if I ask a question? So you told us a lot about some of the things that the minority supports and that
I can't hear you, ma'am.
you told us a lot about some of the things that the minority supported and why, and how the majority did it may be wrong in your opinion. So what is the minority doing to work with the majority to do things right in the job?
You say that, I'm sorry. That is a big high age, you can't hear what these things in the ear, I'm not sure.
Okay, so you've talked a lot about some of the things that you think have been done wrong and why, and maybe how the majority has voted for some of those things. So what is the minority doing now to work with the majority to do things differently in the future? Or are you?
Here's where I got to get really good. There isn't much effort to work between minority and minority. Just I've tried them several times on several bills to talk to people on the majority side. I'm talking to the chair. They made up their mind. And I'm not trying to say insult. That's not the purpose. They really believe what they're doing is right and not changing. I know there's a big controversy over the non-discrimination bill. It was poorly written. I think that whatever's challenged in court is going down the flames. The rewrote part of it, you put some old stuff and attached it on, and I looked at it and said, this is written very, very poorly. Why can't we sit down and write it right? I did that. I sat down and redrafted the whole thing. Those people were not even talking.
Do you feel like they maybe have that same perception of the minority? Do you think they maybe have that same perception of the minority?
Could be.
And how do we get past that?
I really don't know. I've never seen such a division, such a depth of a split between two political viewpoints. I came out of the House of Representatives, I carried bills, and the donut bill around Missoula. Dave Wansley and then a couple other Democrats came up and signed on that bill. They said, we think this is a good thing. We had several.
The donut bill being the pass.
Yeah.
The bypassing.
No, it was about a 4-mile ring around the city, for the city to get in and help contracts for administered for building a home or recommission. And it really boiled up over this one home down here at Fort Lower. It was telling me we couldn't finish house out, we couldn't use shingles, they wanted that kind of stuff. There was no reason for the city to do it. I think Mayor Cadiz was behind it. God bless Mayor Cadiz. I worked there most of the thing. But I think if we had that, we would have handled it. I got very, very, very consensus. And in the legislature, carried the bill, got it through the House just in time for the Supreme Court to shoot it down. So they were all the way back and started once the Senate got to the Senate, so, no, I can't do this. It stopped city authorization, contract construction, have to say it. But we had a lot of help.
Question for you. We were going to have Councilwoman Stacy Rye, who represents the other side, be here today as well to kind of, but she's not feeling well, obviously. How do you think she would be responding to what you're saying?
I don't know. I thought a lot about that. I thought, well, if I make these kind of remarks, where would she be? I'm not sure. I think she would defend some of what's been done. And she would really defend this conduct. I'm not telling you anything that's a lie. I'm not telling you anything that isn't true. She may disagree with how we should do it, but mine was good. She said, anytime she wants to do it, she needs to be heard. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you obviously support Missoula Aging, and Stacy Rye also serves on the board of one of our other health and human service programs in Missoula. So how are we going to ensure with the increasingly tightening budget in Helena and also in the city that we protect these really important health and human service programs in Missoula?
Well, Susan and I and several other people over human services talked about this. And I think there's going to be a lot of midnight caravans over there to testify from. Now, when I was there, I remember people coming in. And honestly, the first couple of caravans, I didn't understand what the issue was. And I know the legislature there, the legislators are there now, they don't understand the issue. So the best we can do is go over and say, here's what should you do to put this in. I don't know how else to say it. Hopefully, get someone else say it. I think there's things that could be done. And I don't think you guys are able to, for instance, or some of the other issues. That's not the best thing to say. We'll see what happens.
Are there things that you see the city is doing good and that we should continue to work to promote?
I think Thompson Junction did a good job. I just had problems how they went through and how it was coming. In fact, it almost lost 3 government. council, please vote for it. You can't vote for it, it's illegal. When I explained that, they said, why can't the city pay for it? The city could. They think we can negotiate with the landowner out there at the development, so we can put a price on it. And then we come in here and say, yeah, let's put that money in, think the trails and necessary,
What's the difference between that trail and sidewalks that are now required by developers and maintaining the sidewalks, which are now required by private property owners?
that particular trail is supposed to be a long range thing in terms of the distance. You can take a bicycle from University, go all the way around, get across the river, come back down through that area, all the way back down. I think it would be the kind of thing that big cities have. It's not a sidewalk, it's a recreation. Sidewalks we see it necessary to the development. You've got homes, you've got sidewalks, you've got big streets, you have room for vehicles, basically bicycles. That's the difference in the sidewalk. Does that make any sense?
Not really, because the sidewalk it's essentially the same. I mean, that's why people use those bike trails that go through town, is because you don't really want to go walking on the side of Russell Street, for instance.
And in that sense, you're right. I think out there you've got sidewalks around the houses, to and from where they park the cars in the street. This would be behind it. This is where you're driving along and bang, there's the river.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be land that belongs to the land. Landowner would not be responsible to maintain.
So the city would be responsible for it. So why isn't the city responsible for some of the sidewalks up there?
Well, some of them. They're putting their salaries back to land.
Do you have a brief explanation for how the Broadway fiasco happened as far as going down to 2 lanes to the center turn lane, as far as how they plan for traffic growth the next 15, 20, 30 years?
Mr. Mayor, where are you?
Was that just politics, or?
When the mayor came into office, there was a lot of protests against making that Broadway diagram. We had a lot of signatures saying that, unfortunately, a lot of those signatures come from outside the city. And there's 35,000 cars a day come out of Raleigh County. So that's business people, homeowners, families. And they were saying, don't do this. The trucking industry said, don't do this. Now there's a foot to extend it all the way east to out of town. And this is insanity. Especially when you still have highway traffic going through parts of town. Those kind of things. It's simple.
Plan for the future. It doesn't seem like you guys think about the future and growth and traffic growth.
Well, yeah, I think the people want it. I think they are thinking about whatever you do. Well, I think we're going to have a real problem next time.
So, but that was more of a majority city council approval, or was it transportation department?
The mayor told us from somewhere else that this would be very easy to change. In a year, we might just take some striping off and change it. The reason we want a lot of those to help that crossing is reason. If you remember, there were several deaths that were not. It only happened again this time. All those folks that supposedly were the reason for doing this were saying, all we want is to change the striping. I was too new on the council to understand how that was. I think about go back and do that.
Okay.
Mayor, you talked about bringing an executive recruiter to bring jobs into Missoula. Is that supported by both sides, or because you're?
As far as I'm concerned, yes. I'll tell you a concern I have there. My son is a graduate engineer, another bobcat, but he's from Bozeman. In electrical engineering and computer science, and went to work for HP and at Boise. And then he moved over to an outfit called Census, which is a worldwide corporation. They build control control of water and water mains, that kind of thing, like gas lines and that sort of thing. very clean and I would want to see something like that. Look at that, look at the place, the space they needed for the buildings, look at the space they needed to park the cars and employees, where they go, shooting around, this kind of thing. Where did they put that in the, this brings up discussion. I think it doesn't mean I'm against this, though. Conflict between affordable housing, open space, very different places. I'm not going to put a business like that down in Mountain Zoo. This is no place for it. I had a long talk with Dick King when I first got back. He says, probably the best thing to do is put it out there. I think as long as we aren't thinking in terms of bringing that kind of business in, maybe it starts with now. I think we're going to have a hard time getting that kind of business. I think something like that would be wonderful. So, very hard to do. There are taxes, county limits, employees would pay all the taxes. It would be a real, just win for the city.
We have time for maybe one more question. Maybe you have something.
Bring me lunch, I'll tell you all of it.
You're welcome to come back.
Another question?
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Jay, for being flexible and very. We'll be bundling back up and heading back outside and back to the.
Committed to affordable housing, conservation of Missoula's public lands, and regulation reform. Mayor Ingen was elected in 2005 in a race that began with 6 candidates. He ran unopposed and was reelected on November 3rd, 2009. Since taking office in 2006, Ingen made good on his promise to pass an open space bond for Missoula and worked with Missoula's county to help ensure that important lands in and out of the city are protected for our generations, for those who inherit the special place. So very going from our land use exercise to someone who has been working to protect that. It's awesome. Ingen's affordable housing team has been working for 2 years, identifying housing needs in the city, educating our neighbors about the importance of workforce housing in our economy and community, and create a momentum for decision makers to consider housing affordability as they make policy choices. In 2008, a clear majority of the Missoula City Council passed an affordable housing resolution, formalizing the city's commitment to decent housing for all Missoulians. Under Mayor Ingen's direction, the city embarked on the difficult but necessary mission of updating and reforming the city's antiquated zoning and regulations. Based on his belief that considerable community tensions is the product of outdated and outmoded regulations, Ingen again, with the support of the majority of the City Council, launched a grassroots process to write regulations that work for Missoula and its wide variety of citizens. In 2009, the city approved the new regulations. Attorney General Steve Bullock appointed Mayor Ingen to a 3-term on State Gaming Advisory Council in January 2010. Ingen was appointed to the Board of Directors of the Montana League of Cities and Towns in February 2010. He will represent Missoula and other cities and towns in the west central region of the state. With his leadership team and capable city staff, Ingen's delivered balanced budgets to the city, to council, continued delivering important services to the folks who count on the city for clean, safe streets, fire, medical aid, permits, and parks, much more. Before serving as mayor, Ingen served on a team as city council member, was an award-winning writer and editor for the city's daily newspaper, owned and operated his own small business, and volunteered for a wide variety of Missoula's nonprofit organizations, concentrating on human services. As an amateur auctioneer and MC, Ingen helped raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to help our friends and neighbors in the community. Ingen was born in Missoula in 1964, attended Willard Elementary, Hellgate High School, and then the University of Montana, where he received his bachelor's degree in journalism. His wife Tracy continues to own and operate a travel agency here in Missoula. The Ingens live in the Rattlesnake Valley with a rescued greyhound Patches, a rescued Labradoodle Odie, and a
bunch of fish. So please welcome our Mayor, John Egan.
Thank you very much. That, I never quite know who that is, but there was a biography, so that's very helpful. Sean, all my comments today are trademarked and copyrighted, so the license agreement at the end here, but it's all there.
Just make sure your back's to me when you say those.
Yeah, when you're my size, my back's always to you anyway. Well, good morning. This is a nice group of smiling faces participating in Leadership Missoula today. My understanding is we're going to talk a little bit about hard decisions. Is that, yeah? We don't actually do that in my line of work. So, to the degree possible, we waffle and actually decide nothing and defer those decisions for folks who decide that. So, decisions, interesting. So when I became mayor of the city of Missoula, we had something going for us which was called money. And for the last 2 years in the city of Missoula and around the nation, money's been a little scarcer. And I will tell you that it is easier to govern, it's easier to administer, it is easier to be mayor of the city of Missoula when there's money. When there's not, the decisions become much more difficult and in many ways much less interesting. So over the course of the last 2 years in the city of Missoula, we have reduced our expenditures by about 10%. We will be continuing that trend, generally speaking, through this fiscal year, which began in July, and we've really begun our budget process for the next fiscal year, which begins next July. We actually started talking about that in December, immediately following the ratification of our fiscal year 2011 budget. That's the nature of our process today. And when I started as mayor, our budget process was about having my staff, department heads come to me with requests for what we call enhancements. What we talked about is what we're going to do more of, how we're going to do more better, how we're going to change our operations, and all of those things were about spending money. And typically, we have that money by virtue of the growth in our community, generally speaking, and that has sustained us over the last roughly decade or so preceding the recession. So those conversations were about assembling a budget team and discussing the merits of each of these new proposals, what we're going to do differently and what we're going to do better over the course of the next year. Over the last 2 years, our conversations have been about what you are going to cut from your budget, what options you're going to bring us that will allow us to continue to deliver the services that are our core responsibility every day throughout the next fiscal year, how we're going to maintain that level of service while, in some cases, cutting your budget directly. And I have to tell you that it's interesting. When we were talking about enhancements at the city of Missoula with staff, and the questions that were about who gets a slightly larger piece of the pie, I believe there was more animosity between department heads and city leadership about who got the more than there has been during the discussions about how we do less. I don't know if I'm describing that the way I want to. The short version is people have been so good around City Hall about making the difficult decisions about how to manage their budgets with less than they were when they had more. So in some ways, adversity, I think, continues to bring out some of the best in people. That's not always the case, but that's certainly been my experience here. So our issues are how how do you do the things that folks expect you to do, continue to do them well, while recognizing that lots of folks are struggling, that every day the national news is sort of spiritual drip torture. Every day for the last couple of years, it's gotten a little bit better, but every day in the news what you heard was about a dismal economy, about the difficulties that people are having in communities around the United States, and how communities are responding to that. And we're serving folks who are getting that bad news every day, and really are wondering what our response is to that. And our ability to tell that story is a little bit complicated as well. But we've tried to do that, certainly through our budget processes and beyond. So, for fiscal year 2010, we did not raise our general fund tax levy. In fiscal year 2011, we created 2 special districts to help us continue to support our basic services in both parks and roads. And all of the employees at the city of Missoula, union and non-union, all elected to forego, in the case of union folks, raises to which they were contractually guaranteed. Those folks came to the table with me and said, we recognize the difficulties that are happening in the nation and in our community, and we recognize that we need to come together to figure this out. So, for fiscal year 2012, I think things are looking up. And in fact, there's a bunch of good news on the horizon, in my opinion. And it comes in the form of anything from what's happening with our economic development efforts, which began actually a little more than a year ago at this point. Last year I announced that we began an initiative called the Best Place Project, and as of today, I met with a group of leaders of that project, the Missoula Economic Partnership, and we're in the process of hiring an executive to manage that organization and to drive economic development in a new model within the city and county of Missoula. And that model is a public-private partnership in the truest sense of the word. The investors are both public sector and private sector. The governance is both public sector and private sector. And I think we're going to do some great things. The fact that we're even thinking about it, what we're hearing from our recruiting company, the fact that we're even thinking about it in some cases puts us ahead of some of the communities with which we'll be competing for new business. The fact that we are emphasizing our capacity to assist businesses who are working and have delivered the goods in Missoula today, existing businesses, how can we shore them up, help them expand, retool, how can we help them get through the maze of programs, help them identify opportunities. All that is part of this economic development program. And then really we're going to look at efforts at redevelopment. What are our opportunities within the existing infrastructure, and what infrastructure do we need to develop over time to ensure that businesses can grow and prosper? Because when businesses grow and prosper in our community, everybody does. That's my humble opinion as a person who continues to believe in the power of the middle class in America and in our city. So, hard decisions. We make hard decisions in this room pretty regularly. I am, for better or worse, most of the time, a tax collector. I am inherently unpopular in some circles when I wear that hat. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't make difficult decisions about funding community infrastructure in this room, there is no opportunity for this community to continue to thrive. And it's as simple as that. That's a painful reality, and some of the rhetoric we hear on the national level and some of what we're hearing at the state level as well makes it difficult to remind folks that especially in communities like ours, your tax dollars are an investment in what we all do together. it is our opportunity to fund some of the men and women in this room who might be a cop or a firefighter. It's our opportunity to do something as unsexy but as utterly necessary as cleaning wastewater, which again is part of the puzzle here. We save lives and we handle sewage. It's an interesting spectrum of the work that we're engaged in. Well, there's a whole series of sewage jokes that I've gone through over the years. But reminding people that is an investment. And also, our commitment on the backside of that has to be about demonstrating the value of that investment. And that is not always easy, but it's certainly a piece of the puzzle. And I think we need to do a better job of that over time. And we're working in a number of ways to try to satisfy that. There's a turn of phrase that I think about a lot in my line of work, and it is that you can take the easy wrong or the hard right. Doing the right thing is often more difficult, more painful, more abrupt, has more immediate complex consequences. But often those hard decisions have the best long-term payback, the most real impact on your organization, your community, your business, your personal life. But it's tough. What I do is try to take care of the worst, the toughest thing every morning. So I get out of bed. There are some other things that come into play as the day wears on, but really over time, one of the lessons I have learned, and it's because I've seen so many others do it, is you have to sort of swallow hard when it's not difficult or popular and forge ahead and own your decision and live with the consequences and copy your mistakes if you've made them, and I've certainly made them. But if you're not making mistakes, you are also not taking risks. You're not moving forward. You're not making choices. And we can spend a lot of time in our lives, in our professional, personal lives, looking in the rearview mirror and thinking about what's happened. Or we can spend time, we have a choice, we can spend time thinking about what's coming up. What can we change? What can we do differently? The pressure in my job, I have learned, is all about staying the same. Most of the folks I work with, most of the folks I serve, are generally comfortable with the status quo because they're used to it. They get it, they understand it, it doesn't challenge them. I didn't take this job, didn't ask for this job, didn't apply for this job, haven't operated in this job because I wanted everything to stay the same. That's not, I don't think that's the way we're wired in terms of leadership. Instead, we're about making change. And that change, I think, has to involve lots of folks. It has to involve, when possible, consensus. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just got to get ahead of it. You got to lead. You got to make difficult choices. Again, face those consequences. There's nothing I've done in my public life of any merit that hasn't been a function of change, of doing something differently, examining the status quo. Right? And it's tough. I had a meeting yesterday. We've pushed snow around in the city of Missoula the same way for probably the last 20 years. And we haven't examined the way we push snow around. We haven't considered, are there better ways to push snow around? Have our policies and our investments reflected our desire to serve the public in the way we push snow around?
And so yesterday we just had a conversation about whether, does it make sense for the Parks Department to clean the sidewalks and boulevards in the middle of the street, or does it make sense for a well-funded street department to do that? And that's a head scratcher, and I don't know the answer, but we have to ask the question, because we've done the same thing for 20 or 30 years. And it may be fine, but unless we're challenging ourselves, unless we're asking those questions, we don't get to explore. We don't get to think. You know, what's the term of phrase? Think outside the box, right? Some of us think outside the bun. That's a whole different issue. You know, it's those sort of relentless challenges, you know, and we have to challenge ourselves, and we have to challenge the way we do business every day. With every one of those changes comes complications. And it's pretty easy for us to say, well, in the case of just about anything I do as mayor that involves city councilman, Councilman Haynes is back here, will discuss his views with you shortly. But anything I do, really, that involves council has inherent risk. It involves folks saying no. It involves folks saying that's stupid. Sometimes it involves folks saying that's brilliant. But it's all about risk, and it's all about having to figure out ways to make your argument, make your case, do the right, difficult thing. It all has consequences. But if you don't take any of those risks, if you don't push in one way or another, you get pulled in ways you don't want to go. You got to stand for something or fall for anything, right? So that's the piece of the problem. So I'm done talking. What can I tell you? I'll answer your questions. If I don't know the answers, I will make answers. You all know what I do for a living. Excellent. All indoctrinated. Yes, sir.
With the your new business, trying to create new businesses, would you talk a little bit more on that? Where you see that going? What type of businesses you are trying to attract in Missoula?
Sure.
And then also the $1 million question, Smurf and Stone.
I didn't get the last part. I'm sorry.
Smurf and Stone.
Oh, sure.
You know what's going on, because nobody seems to want us to know what's going on.
Well, at least one of our citizens in this room suggested that I know exactly what's going on, and I'm keeping it from you. So, first question was about business recruitment and attraction. The Best Place project is built on the premise that there is nothing nefarious or malicious going on in the world of economic development in the city of Missoula, but we have an uncoordinated, underfunded, and goal-less strategy, or no strategy at all, frankly, for recruitment, retention, and redevelopment of business in the city of Missoula. And that's nobody's fault. It's organizations doing their pieces, making their pieces of this puzzle work, but without a coordinated strategy, without goals and objectives. So today, we have a goal over the course of the next 5 years through the Missoula Economic Partnership of creating 2,500 jobs that pay at least $37,000 a year. That is the goal. And it's not very sexy, but you got to start somewhere, right? And that's where we're starting. We want to raise the bar a little bit. $37,000 is above the average wage in Missoula today. It's about the average wage in Billings. So our goal here, our lofty goal here, is to raise our average wage to that of Billings. Someday I hope we reach for the stars, but today we're reaching for what we think we can reach for. If we were to reach for the national average wage, to make all those numbers work, we'd have to create something on the order of 7,000 jobs, paying $140,000 a piece. So we've gone with the 2,500 from the 37,000. Today, what would they tell you? Right. If you were to think about locating your business in Missoula, Montana, and you went to the World Wide Interweb, you went to Google, what would you look for?
Economic development.
We got a bunch of low-hanging fruit. We don't have a strategy for identifying what Missoula is about, what the opportunities are here. So long answer, I recognize that. Short version is we are not in the game of recruitment today at all. We have no unified web presence that would suggest to anybody who would like to do business in Missoula that we have our act together at all. If we did, we have no strategy or mechanism for being in touch with those folks, identifying key business contacts within the community for those folks to talk with so they can understand what the opportunities are and what some of the challenges are. We have no way to coordinate any of the state, federal, and local programs that surround economic development and give people a chance or a leg up in our community. All of it is missing. We want to do that. Our recruitment strategy is pretty simple. We have 4 target markets that seem to match the opportunities that Missoula has to offer. These targets were identified by a consultant, Gartner Economics, and they are, and I have to remember them, I have limited capacity. So, the first is pharmaceutical wholesale. We have a fantastic pharmacy school here, and we have, oddly enough, pretty good transportation opportunities and shipping opportunities in and out of Montana that some folks don't recognize, and we need to take advantage of some of those. We have a great entrepreneurial sector here in a world where you can live anywhere, and despite what you're seeing outside today, on the 21st of June, this is a pretty cool place to live. And in fact, it has to be on the 21st of June to have us put up with today. But those entrepreneurs who can live and work anywhere have a real quality of life opportunity here. And that's something that is really critical and paramount to our effort is recognizing our quality of life as an asset and ensuring that in recruiting, retaining, we don't destroy the asset. Right? We don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg, as it were. We are interested in, interestingly enough, the creative community. So it ranges from agencies that do advertising, craft arts, to web development, that sort of work seems to make sense here. And then what's called sophisticated back office, which can be something as sort of big and easy to understand as DirecTV, or something as complex as meeting engineering requirements for global firms. And that's sort of a back office function that we don't think about, but that is a support for larger activities and opportunities. So those are sort of the targets. And when we hire an executive, our expectation is that we'll have a recruiting specialist who will be paying attention to companies that fit with Missoula and that provide some opportunities, always looking back at quality. Now, this isn't a game of quantity. We can all race to the bottom. What we want are high-quality jobs that have some sense of shelf life. And we've seen the old economic development model, which is you offer incentives, typically at the taxpayer's expense, and should that business not meet with success, at the end of the day, the business is gone, the taxpayer's holding the bag, and you've got a building that you built for them that can now be nothing, right? So that's a piece of the recruiting process. Today we really don't do any of that strategically at all. So that's our recruiting piece.
How does the plan address local entrepreneurs and small businesses that are already here?
And because I was born in 1964, I can no longer hear. I'm sorry?
How does the initiative address local entrepreneurs and small businesses that are already here?
Today I will come to some issues here in the city of Missoula. An example I use pretty regularly is that there is a business on 4th Street that hires big brains out of the University of Montana, and those big brains do computer stuff. And the company pays the big brains about $60,000 a year to do that stuff. That's a fantastic job in Missoula. That business spent roughly $60,000 to $70,000 retooling its facility on 4th Street to get technology up to the standard it needed in order to do business. If that business had located in one of our urban renewal districts, there's a good chance that we could have provided some support for those infrastructure improvements, or that would have allowed that business to hire another big brain at $60,000 a year rather than investing in wires or digging up an alley. I think those examples are everywhere. This is a very dialed-in business. It's a smart organization. They have no idea about our redevelopment agency. They have no idea about that local city program that is relatively easy to access once you know about it, and can provide real dollars, put real money on the ground to help your business grow, expand, and establish. We don't do any of that outreach here at the city of Missoula for that great organization and those great opportunities. And we don't do that for all sorts of programs, ranging from local, to state, to federal, in a systematic way. Our plan is to have a retention specialist working for the partnership who is all about presenting a menu of programs and resources for small businesses to access to grow their thing. That person will also have a responsibility for networking and building relationships between these businesses and recognizing where opportunities for business-to-business activity make sense, opportunities where in some cases mergers make sense, co-locations make sense, helping build those relationships. And a piece of that puzzle is you got to get out of your office. And so this person will be charged with knocking on doors. And that person's measure will be about knocking on doors and really doing, in effect, inside sales for the partnership, letting folks know what's available to them, gauging what's up. You know, at no point did it occur to me, and I think it would now, but at no point did it occur to me at any time to go knock on the manager of Macy's door and say, what do you think? How long are you going to be here? Is there anything we can do as a community to help you all out? Are there obstacles you need to overcome? How do we gauge what's going on in your world? And that goes for, whether Terry Brady is interested in retiring and is going to button up Sportsman Surplus. We didn't talk to Terry before he did that, so we didn't understand whether is this simply an exit strategy and you don't want to be in the business of having to kind of train somebody to take over this legacy. You just want to retire, or don't you have the tools or the resources to help you make that transition? We need to ask those questions and have those relationships in the community, and that's a void today. So that's part of what the retention specialist has to be about, and understanding how those relationships work. And again, just really presenting those fairly simple programs. Urban Renewal District 3. How many of you know what that is? Raise your hands. Urban Renewal District 3? All right, so our marketing is fantastic. Urban Renewal District 3 basically surrounds Southgate Mall. And within that urban renewal district, if you're an entrepreneur, a business, and you want to do something with a piece of property, ranging from scraping a derelict building to installing sprinkler systems in that building to bring it up to code for a new use or occupancy, to building sidewalks, to bringing sewer to that property, to upgrading sewer, the list goes on. We'll pay for that 100% in some cases. There's about $3 million sitting in District 3 available for those activities every year. And of this group of dialed-in human beings, 3 of you knew about it. MRA isn't the only, those urban renewal districts aren't the only opportunities for us. There are lots of others, and we're just not telling the story. And we have remarkable assets. You know, I dragged this recruiter around on a tour yesterday, 2 recruiters actually, on a tour yesterday, and despite the fact that we were having vaguely blizzard-like conditions, they told me that this will be an easy community to recruit an executive into, not just because that person can retire as fly fish here, but because we really have a lot going for us, ranging from workforce to, and this is something many of you might not know. I didn't know this. In the economic development world, most communities, if they're starting from the place we're starting, their biggest issue is workforce development. How do you do workforce development? We don't have a workforce development issue. We have a ready-to-go, almost turnkey workforce for almost any organization that might want to come into business. It's a remarkable asset, but we haven't thought about ourselves in those terms, and we haven't thought about some of our other assets in those terms either. We need to package them, and that's sort of the path we're marching. Another really long answer.
Great answer, though.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Shannon. Let me get you some cash. Anything else?
Why is it that you're searching outside Missoula for that executive?
Because we don't trust anyone from Missoula. You know, the search is not limited to outside Missoula. The talent may certainly exist here, and the firm will consider those resumes and applications as well. I mean, interestingly enough, I call it third-party validation. You know, the reason I brought in the Garner team and the reason I brought in the folks from National Community Development Services to do fundraising is that sometimes if I tell you it's broken, you ain't going to believe it's broken. But if you have somebody from somewhere else tell you it's broken, you think they're damn right it's broken. And why didn't he do something about it? Right? So that's third-party validation. Sometimes we need to hear from somebody who doesn't have a pony in the race what's cooking. Interestingly enough, I mean, part of our conversation about this recruitment today has been about, do you want a CEO? That is, do you want someone whose skills are running a business, making payroll, making those hard calls that come every day with managing a business in the private sector? Or do you want somebody who is an economic development specialist, who understands what those CEOs look like and what they do, but whose expertise is really in putting deals together and matching CEOs to CEOs and workforce to project and location to business and all those pieces. And our consultants will tell you that they believe there's some sort of hybrid that's out there that makes some sense. There are a bunch of people who would love to be frankly, if I had any of the expertise, I'd love to be the economic development director in the city of Missoula, but I'm not qualified. I'm just qualified to hire that person. So, along with a bunch of other smart people who help make me look good. But I mean, that's a piece of it, and I mean that is the bitter irony, right? So we want to grow our place and make it better. So let's look outside to do that. I get it. Andy?
Talked about transportation a little bit. How about the Russell Street Bridge? I know that's been ongoing. Is that movement there, or something about that?
Sure. Russell Street is a 1.5 miles of road in the city of Missoula that, if it is reconstructed, will cost $40 million and will have taken about 14 years to build from conception to finish. I don't know when the end of the 14-year period is. In my brain, it's 2014. In the brain of our transportation folks at the state and federal level, that may be a little bit different. The difficulty here is, and this will sound a little bit like finger pointing, and I don't mean to do that. The fact of the matter is that when you're talking about funding a project like Russell Street, to the tune of what was at one time we thought a $20 million project and a $30 million project, and today probably a $40 million project. When we start thinking in terms of those numbers, construction of those projects are not funded by our local tax base. We can't do it. We can't afford it. You run me out on a rail. If I charge you what it would cost to generate that kind of money. So we rely on our state and federal partners to help us get that done with, and this is a slightly pejorative, but we call it the tainted federal dollar. With every federal dollar that comes into a project, a whole bunch of strings come along with that project, and those strings have everything to do with the lowest common denominator. Our regulations, not only here at the City of Missoula, but at the county, state, and federal level, our regulations are largely about dealing with the worst case scenario, the rottenest operator, the slaggiest purveyor, and the most terrible contractor, right? We create all sorts of checks and balances to make sure that we manage for somebody's horrible experience in the past. And that costs money. So we end up with environmental impact statements, which in and of themselves ain't bad. But in the case of the Russell Street EIS, we had a vendor who was consulting on the environmental impact statement, who went belly up during the course of completing that environmental impact statement, which is about a $2 million investment, by the way. And we had to find another consultant to march us through that process. And to a certain degree, they had to start over and recreate some of the documentation in the first process. So I mean, there's sort of a laundry list of things that have not gone particularly well. And mixed in that is the fact that you and I, as citizens of Missoula, don't necessarily agree on whatever the solution might be for Russell Street. So it's not a matter of the benevolent dictator saying, we're going to drop 5 lanes through there, there's going to be a traffic signal here, here, and here. We've got federal regulations, state regulations, local regulations, and community desires, opinions, issues, interests, that all come into play and add to some of the complexity of what we're doing here. So that's where we are with Russell Street. We expect what's called a record of decision sometime spring, summer. That record of decision as part of the environmental impact statement will allow us to start chasing what's called a preferred alternative. That is a general sense of what the road ought to look like and how it ought to work. Provided that our federal partners sign off on that, our next step is to go to a design phase, and we're actually talking with the state of Montana in terms of administration here, something called a design build. So rather than doing all the design work up front and then doing a bid contract, those processes operate concurrently and help us speed things up, and also we think help add value. And frankly, a big piece of this is, we've had to create a double overpass for the Klaus property because we need to make sure that we still get pretty flowers and fireworks. And that's thrown about an $8 million wrench into the thing. No, but I mean, that is seriously one of the considerations. We have folks like the Klauses who've done business on Russell Street forever, and they have some expectations as property owners about what might happen there. We have community expectations about the uses of the land around those transportation facilities. So it's all pretty complicated. In 2004, I stood on the Orange Street Bridge, and Max Baucus announced that he brought $6 million back from Washington, D.C. to fund the construction of the Russell Street Bridge. That $6 million in today's dollars, based on everything that's happened during the course of the process here, I'm guessing is maybe worth $1.5 million or $2 million as part of the deal. So it's ugly. I think there has to be a better way. The better way, Andy, is local. The more control we have over our ability to raise and spend money for these kind of projects, the better off we are. They cost a half or more or less, and they take half or less time, I guarantee. But it's tough.
Question. How does the Best Place project affect, how will it affect MAEDC?
We continue to have conversations with MAEDC and MAEDC's executive committee, and in fact, had a meeting yesterday morning and another meeting this morning. MAEDC has, for a variety of reasons, sort of apart from our efforts with the Economic Partnership and the Best Place project, had changed its business model and its certainly its scope. And a lot of that has to do with cash and some difficulties there. Our hope is that our conversations with MAEDC continue to be that over time we would like MAEDC's loan program to be able to be folded in to our organization so that we have that tool available, which is significant and important. It's done a lot of work, good work in the community. We'd like to have that tool available, and we'd also like those loans to be well managed. So, and that MAEDC really brings a valuable asset to the table in those terms. So the conversations have been good, cordial, and I think we're marching together in a way that we can cooperate and work together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your next speakers will tell you I'm wrong about all of this. Thank you very much. Good to see you all.
Our next speaker is Councilman Dick Haynes. Dick Haynes, he's a graduate of MSU, graduated in 1959 with a degree in engineering. Served 2 years in the U.S. Army and then worked for 2 years with a private engineering firm in Billings. Following that, Dick's had a long history of public service. He worked for the U.S. Forest Service for 30 years as an engineer. And following his retirement from the Forest Service, he served 3 terms in the Montana State House of Representatives. Dick's currently in his 2nd term on the Missoula City Council, and he's actively involved with the following organizations: Missoula Aging Services, the City and County Health Boards, Five Valleys Audubon, Travelers Rest, Lincoln Telephone, and then the Missoula Convention and Visitors Bureau. I'm pleased to introduce Dick Haynes.
It's an honor to be here. I'm not sure it is. I really think these kinds of things that you people represent, the leadership of Missoula, you hear me. I don't really know.
Louder.
I have a very weak voice.
The mic is on.
I hear this all the time. Will this help any?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I hear frequently. I have a very weak voice. I had the speaker in the House of Representatives where they could adjust the volume and speak there, turn mine up as high as it go, and I said, I still can't hear you. So if I'm not getting across with the volume, please say something to me. I was going to say, I think this kind of an organization that you folks have going through right now is super. I came and talked to a group maybe 8, 9 years ago of same leadership in Missoula, and talked then about how the voting went on a particular issue in the State House of Representatives, just to show you how that process works. And I've gone through something with the Forest Service called intensive semester, which was similar to this, only instead of meeting once a month or something like that, they took about 10 of us in a group, just a very small group, and we did this kind of thing for a full month. And after that, I was privileged to go back to Washington, D.C. for 2 weeks and follow the legislative process there, where we talked to congressmen and senators and legislators of all kinds of lobbyists and follow a bill all the way through. Probably the best things I ever did in my life in terms of learning how government works. So today I'd like to say a few things about how government works here. I think right now there's a big disagreement about how we do things. I think the mayor gave you a good rundown on the things we want to do. I would say right off, I think that the minority on city council want to do those things. It's not whether we want to, it's how we do it, where the money comes from, and how the process we go through to make that work. Talking about transportation plan, I've got a whole bunch of things here. So since the other person isn't supposed to be here today, but take some time and tell us what's going on. So if you get tired of me, get up and leave. If you got a question, anytime, raise your hand, no problem. Talking about transportation, I'm very concerned that the city's not really looking at how we take traffic through and around Missoula. As you know, there's a real concern about 5th and Arthur in that area there. One of the things I've been pushing, even when I was still in the House of Representatives, trying to get money to do it, and when Schweitzer came in, the money I had set aside to start that process disappeared. So maybe with him going out, we can get something going again. But I wanted to do some studies of a route around Missoula. People call it the bypass. In other words, it would go from 90 down to somewhere south of Missoula and come back onto 93. Now the reason for that is that it would allow traffic, instead of going through the city of Missoula and utilizing Reserve Street and that kind of a process, the interstate type traffic would not even come through town. Visualize Reserve Street when you don't have that kind of traffic on it. I think it would help consider. Right now we have 2 streets in Missoula, Brooks and Reserve, that handles all traffic going through Missoula. And people say we don't have enough money to handle that. Well, I would point out Kalispell, which got I don't know how many $1 million through the effort of our state senator, our Baucus, got money for them to build a bypass around them. Because as I'm sure you're familiar with, the main drag of Kalispell, it came up and went around both sides of the courthouse and went right down the main drag. That won't happen anymore. And we need to look at that same approach here. And Billings, right now, as we speak, has construction going on, and I'm not sure that I know all the facts of where it's supposed to go, but it leaves I-94 and goes north, and it's a $750 million project. And it'll build, it's called Charlotte Way, into a 5-lane street that is two going each direction, plus a passing or place to pass or turn. And they got the first quarter of that under contract, and it's a $75 million project. And I don't know all the funding, but I know some came out of the recent effort to help cities and states, and some is local, and I don't know how to raise it all, but it's under contract. The interesting thing about it is all the intersections are going to be roundabouts. And everybody, a lot of people in this town say, oh, we can't live in roundabouts. Well, we put one out where I live, and it's working fine. Much better. In fact, I had a bet with one of the people out there. If it didn't work, I'd buy a family dinner. So far, I haven't had to do it. But Billings has got this going on, and the thing that really is attractive to me is all along the right of way, on both sides of this new construction, businesses are already vying for ownership of that land to set up businesses along it, where there aren't any, which tells me they see that as a way for businesses to succeed right there. I think we need to do something like that here. Visualize a road going around the west end of Missoula, how easy it would be to get in and out of Missoula. You cross all the east-west streets, you could have all kinds of takeoffs. You could get off on the Broadway, get off on the 3rd, on the 7th, wherever you need to. And I think that would do wonders for our business community. So that's one thing I'd like to see. But so far, everybody's saying, oh, we just can't do that. And I hear the mayor say, we need to think outside the box. Well, I believe in that. I think we need to do that. What I wanted to point out today to you folks is some of the attitudes of city council and how we spend your money as taxpayers. I don't think, and I really mean this, I don't think a lot of the average taxpayers in Missoula understand what's going on. So I'm probably going to ask some questions here to see how you folks understand them. The first place I want to start, I want to tell you about how the administration went of the contract that we built, Malfunction Junction. This is not an argument about the design. I know there's people that like that and there's people that don't like it. The issue I had with it, and a couple other people on council, was how we administered the contract. That had federal money in it, and federal money comes to Missoula from the Federal Highway highway administration to the state and from the state to the city. And when you have federal money anywhere in a project, the feds never really quite let go of it. They want to know how you're spending it and what you're doing. So in this case, the Federal Highway Administration and the FIT, they said you were not administering a contract, you don't know what's going on out there. And they were right. I didn't know much about it. There was a letter to the editor, I believe, from the mayor, said, well, we've got some problems, but most of this bookkeeping and record keeping, and we'll take care of it, won't be a big problem. Well, the next thing I knew is Jim Lynch, the director of the Transportation Department in the governor's cabinet, called for a meeting. So they asked the mayor and Mr. Bender at that time, I think he just moved into the job he has now, but during this construction, he was head of public works and was responsible for administering that contract to build that thing. Well, I went over there with John Henderson, who's also on city council with me, and we weren't invited, but the bench said, fine, come on over. It's an open public meeting, come over. I have no idea what's going on, so we walked in there, sat down and listened. Well, vision a room something like this. And all along one side were all the engineers and technicians and bookkeepers and contract administrators from the state highway department. Along this side were engineers and people, including the state director, a woman civil engineer, I think a considerable talent from the Federal Highway Administration. Across the back of the room was Jim Lynch, his number 2 person, a couple of their aides, and then Henderson and I sat down in my corner because those 2 chairs were empty. The other end of the room was Bruce Bender, an engineer who left his employment in the city of Missoula shortly thereafter. I think this had something to do with that. And it seems like the Federal Highway Administration is saying, Missoula, you didn't administer this contract right. We don't know what's on the ground out there. We don't know how you spent the money. We don't know what you bought with it. And at one point, the number 2 person in the Department of Transportation state stood up and almost shaking his fist, he looked across the room and said, I have never seen a mess like this before. I thought, holy cow, what's going on here? And then the lady from the Federal Highway Administration said, we have done everything we can to work with the city of Missoula. We've bent over backward, but we're not getting anywhere. And it looked like for a while we were going to have to turn back $3 to $5 million from city coffers. In other words, what happens is the Federal Highway Administration says, if you didn't spend this money right, we'll take it away from the state. And of course, the state has the choice of taking it away from the city or finding the money in their own coffers. And from what I can get from people there, the various people from these organizations, is the state was going to take it away from the city. Well, after much arguing, they finally said, okay, if the city will take and give us a 5-year warranty on the materials and the construction and pay roughly $200,000, we won't take this money away from it. Otherwise, we were looking at a $3 to $5 million takeaway. And that was finally agreed on. Well, then Mr. Bender said, why are you making us warrant this stuff for 5 years? We haven't done it before. I thought the most telling remark was from Mr. Lynch when he said, because we don't know what's on the ground out there. We don't know what the materials are. We don't know how much material we put in there. We don't know about the gradation of the gravel or the gradation of the aggregate in the asphalt. We don't know how much you spend or what kind of paint you put down for striping. All that stuff is we don't know. So we're going to make the city warrant that for at least 5 years. If it works, then fine, we'll move on. But keep your fingers crossed. I haven't seen anything start to come apart yet down there on Malfunction Junction. It also came out of that, the idea that the state was not going to let the city build anything for a while. And I give you the example of the roundabout on Higgins. That was built by the state rather than the city. It was originally scheduled to be built by the city. But the state is saying, we don't trust your administration of contracts. To me, that's a hell of a note to have an agency tell a city like Missoula that's how they look at how we do business. When I got home, I told the mayor I had a real problem with how things had gone and, Mr. Bender behaved and this kind of stuff. And he said he would talk to Mr. Bender, so the next thing in this room right here, I'm standing here, Mr. Bender came up to me and he said, I understand you want to talk to me. said, well, yeah, I'd like to discuss this contract, but we were really listening to it. So I was starting to go back up the chain of command as who was responsible for what. And I finally got to the point that it was quite obvious that it was Mr. Bender's responsibility. When I got to that point, instead of agreeing with that, he turned and he walked out the door and he says, well, Federal Highway Administration just doesn't understand how we do business in the city of Missouri. Probably the most truthful comment I've heard out of that man. Anyway, that's where that left, and so we're waiting to see how that goes. The other thing next thing I want to talk about a bit here, how many of you paid any attention to this recent passage of special districts? A few. That's more than I'm getting other places. Do you understand the significance of those special districts? Well, the deal is, the legislature will set it up so cities could pass special districts. And they're supposed to encompass a certain area, and there are two different types. One for parks and recreation, and one for roads. And they're a taxing district. If you're within that, you will be taxed to support either construction or repair of roads, that type of thing, or park enhancements. Well, the problem with them is they're not like maintenance districts. Maintenance districts are very specific, have been around a long time, we can only spend the money a certain way. And these special taxing districts, they can spend it any way they want. The reason the city administration wanted it is they had about a $500,000 deficit in their budget for 2011. Now, those of us on the council tried very hard to get them to understand there's other ways to fill in that gap. And in fact, we got down almost to the point where in front of the state said, well, we have more tax money coming back to you, about $470.
When I talked about planners, I miss Debbie, who's an engineer over at Morrison and Merrily. And planners always kind of use circles and smooth flowing lines. Because Debbie's here and she's an engineer, I actually use squares so she'd understand. Engineers take a little extra time. So we've tried to talk about public finance. We've touched on some of the important issues that are associated with growth through your participation, and you guys have been very patient. Here's what I want you to know. The only way that government can get revenue, and there's only three ways, okay? There's a property tax, and there's the income tax, and there's what we call consumption tax, which some might call sales tax, I'll call it consumption tax. How we move forward in this community, right, is critical to understand how taxing affects housing. 20% of a mortgage payment is taxes. 20% of a mortgage payment is taxes. As Missoula moves into the future, some of the 9 best cities to live in for affordable housing are cities like Detroit right now. All those 9 cities, none of the Rocky Mountain West. Well, we have a wonderful setting. I want you to know that the policies of the U.S. government, in particular the U.S. Forest Service, determine in a large part the quality of the setting we live in. So if you moved here for the setting, for the clean rivers and the mountains and all that, okay, what has happened to our mountains and our forests, right? What's the future for our mountains and our forests? What does that mean for our quality of life and our ability to attract people to Missoula? For my vision of the future for Missoula is I export brain power, right? I don't sell 2x4s outside this community. I sell an hour of your brain or an hour of Sean's brain, okay? But in order for me to attract you away from other places, I have to have something. I have to have a setting. The other thing I have to have is a workforce, right? As I told you before, the demographics are changing, and the workforce is going to become a scarce resource. And the workforce will move where there is affordable housing and where there are jobs, all right? So in this great state of Montana, if our taxing policy makes housing a comparative disadvantage because of the property tax, right, or other reasons, then people will not come to Missoula in that workforce, okay? The game has changed. The landscape has changed significantly. And public policy, right, related to the cost of housing, and for us in particular, we're not Great Falls, Montana. We're Missoula, Montana, right? And the identity of Missoula, Montana is largely outside of our hands. It's in the hands of other policymakers. We need to change that, all right? I've had a great time with you today. Do you have any questions for me? None? Thank you. Okay, I'll tell you a story. There was a town much smaller than Missoula, okay? And whenever they had a problem or issue, whether they had to decide how fast their community was going to grow or where it might go, okay? They always had a really wise person in that community, and she lived up on a mountain, very wise woman. And oftentimes townspeople would go up to consult her. And one day, a couple of 12-year-old boys in this case, right, decided they'd see if they could fool the wise woman. So what they did is they captured a little sparrow. And their plan was to go up on the mountain, a sparrow behind their back in their hands, and ask the wise woman if she could guess what they had in their hands, right? And then they would ask her if the sparrow was alive or dead. And if her answer was alive, of course, they'd kill it behind their back, try to prove her wrong. I was 12 years old once. Okay? So they grabbed the sparrow, they marched up the hill, knocked on the door. The wise woman came to the door, said, young fellows, what can I do for you? I go, well, we have a question. She goes, what's the question? They said, well, can you guess what I have behind my back? And the wise woman said, I think you have a bird in your hand. And the other gentleman said, is the bird alive or dead? So the wise woman looked at each one of them right in the eye. And she said, that is in your hands. That is in your hands. This is in your hands. Thank you.
The presenter of the day is Nick Kaufman from WGM. He will be doing a land use planning exercise. Nick has been a planner with WGM for 30 years. He's been on the chamber board for the last 7 years.
Go ahead.
Let's see, he's also been a former board member for Missoula Area Economic Development, MBIA, or Missoula Building Industry Association. Past president of the Montana Association of Planners. He's a member of the American Planning Association of Urban Land Institute. Adjunct professor at the University of Montana, where he has taught land use design for 2 decades. Lived in the Missoula Valley since 1970. Undergraduate degree in economics and a master's degree in rural town and regional planning from the University of Montana. And he sits on the facilities committee at the YMCA Community Hospital and the leadership team for Best Place Initiative.
Thank you.
Nick Kaufman, WGM.
I don't have to lose weight anymore. I just come to these and get introduced, and I just... how is everyone this morning? You're awfully quiet. When I come into a room and I can hear the air conditioning system work, it kind of bothers me a little bit. So why don't you all stand up for a minute? Okay, so do you take up more space when you stand up, or do you take up less space when you stand up? Does the room feel bigger, or does the room feel smaller? Smaller. So, you all live in Missoula? How many people own their own home? Okay. How many people live there for more than 10 years? How many people think the place has changed? How many people think the place has changed for the good? Okay. What do you think has caused the change? What's changed good about Missoula? Shy group.
More things to do.
More things to do? Outdoor stuff? Indoor stuff? Great. Thanks, Bill. Better coffee? All right. The Orange Street Bridge is nice? Yep. The walking bridges are nice. California Street, Scott Street, wonderful places to go this time of year. So, it's all about change. Those of you who are a little older, maybe in my age category, and by the way, I dyed my hair this color so I could be part of the fastest growing age group in the country, which is 55 and up. Okay, so finally I belong to a really good group. But in decades past, you could buy something, right, and keep it for 20 years, right? You could buy a single lens reflex camera in a case of Tri-X 400 ASA film, right, and count on keeping that for 20 years. Not anymore. How many people shoot a film camera? How many people drive a car that has a carburetor? How many people drive a car that is a crossover, part electric and part not? Okay? That's coming. So we live in an era of change. Okay? The most amazing part of change is that the post-war baby boomers, who were the biggest part of the population, okay, are now starting to age. As they start to age, they are going to move out of the production function, okay, and into retirement. Okay? That means that their income might not still go up. Okay? How is the state of Montana financed?
Income tax.
Income tax. Okay? All right? That means that income tax revenues might be going down if the fastest growing segment of the population is 55 and up. Okay? How is local government financed? The property tax. What's happening with property values in the state of Montana? All right, property taxes are going down. That means the revenue to operate state and local government, right, doesn't have the same picture that it used to have. Now, what do you think happens as you approach my age? Do you think the demand for services goes up, or do you think the demand for services goes down? Goes up. All kinds of services, except education. Up. It's going to go up. Right? So we're going to start shifting expenditures from building grade schools and high schools, right, to building more medical facilities, providing a different type of housing and a different level and type of services, right, for that new population. That's change. The other part of change is that likely we're not going to see the economic generator of construction and real estate. How many people in this room have ever made a dollar from banking, wholesale, retail, title companies, engineering, surveying, or any type of construction? All right, almost everybody has. It touches all our lives. It's sort of the invisible economic generator that has allowed Missoula to economically prosper. Okay, there was a time in Missoula when we had about 7 lumber mills. Right, you probably don't know what a teepee burner is because you're all too young. But where Southgate Mall is, there was a lumber mill. Okay? Lumbering and timber industry were the primary economic generator for this community. All right? Right now in the industrial sector, we have the high-density particle board plant in our economic base, and that's it. Okay? All right? So we've got the University of Montana. We've got healthcare. Thanks, Bill, for everything with the International Art Institute. But here's what happens in a healthy economy. Can I have you for a second? And you. And you. Come on. No, don't be shy. I'll stay for the moment, I'll stay as safe as this way. All right? So purple is the color for industry. Okay? So in a healthy economy, we have industrial sector. We love the industrial sector. Why? Because it's got high-value property, and we get a great amount of property tax from that. Okay? And industry sells to someone from outside the community. That means that the income and property taxes that industry paid get forward shifted to someone outside the community. Thank you for paying our taxes. Okay? Then we have the commercial sector. Okay? These are the businesses in our community. They're also high value, right? Why do we put fire stations downtown? It's the highest value real estate. That's where we need to protect it most. Okay? All right? So commercial also pays a large amount of property taxes and income taxes, by the way, right? But who do you sell your services to? That's right, to the community. So when you sell a widget to this gentleman, he's paying your property and income tax, right? Okay? But you're the residential sector, right? You are who she serves. You are the one who pays her property and income taxes. Is that not correct? Plus you pay your own property and income taxes. Let's remove industry from the picture. All right? Who's paying property and income taxes?
Forest.
Huh?
Forest.
That's exactly right, because you're forward shifting yours, right? Okay? Right? So that's how important industry is to a community. All right? When we raise taxes in this community now, we raise them basically on ourselves. That's a big deal. Okay? The other thing I want to talk to you about today is, all right, you guys can sit down. Is how we grow. Okay? How many people want to stay in this community, right? All right, everybody wants to stay. Okay? How many people want to have kids? How many people have kids? How many people want their kids to stay in this community? How many people want their kids to live in a new home in their neighborhood? Nobody wants them to live at home. I understand that. The question is where will they live? The question is where will they live? The other question is as we mature, right, that 55 and up age group, as we mature, okay, and our demand for services goes up, and we change how we think about the economy in Missoula, Montana, or western Montana, or the state of Montana, almost everything in eastern Montana is not a major city is losing population. The average age of a farmer in the state of Montana is 59 years old. Okay? 59 years old. What do we do with that farm population as it moves into our community, right? And where do we grow and how do we grow? What's the price of gas? All right. I have an idea. We got 2 high schools in Missoula, one Sentinel and one's Hellgate. We need a new high school. Where should we locate the new high school? I know, let's call it Big Sky High School, and let's move it 4 miles out of town, right? And let's take the whole western part of Missoula and have Big Sky High School serve that, right? So someone who lives out by Kona Ranch Road in Missoula gets to drive 4 or 5 miles in on Mullen Road, right? And 2.5 miles up Reserve Street, and then 2 miles out to the high school. Every single day, every single day, every single day for 9 months. Okay? Great decision. Nice piece of cheap land, right? We put a facility out there. Who's paying the transportation costs for us to get back and forth to that high school? Okay? How many people have a neighborhood park? All right? How many people have gone to the regional park at Fort Missoula? Okay? All right, so now we have regional parks and we have high schools that are outlying, and everybody gets to get in their car and drive from where they are and take their children and themselves to the activities at the regional park, right? Instead of doing those activities in neighborhood parks. All right? So, how many people have more discretionary income today than they had last year? Good job. Okay? Most people don't. So income becomes a scarce resource. How do you want to spend that income? Right? Do you want to spend it by driving to regional centers within your community? Or do you want to spend it by living in a neighborhood that has a neighborhood school, which is a focal point, which has a neighborhood park, which might have a neighborhood shopping center? Or do you want to live in the Walmart realm, where you live 4 miles from Walmart and you drive to Walmart to shop, okay? You drive to the high school to take your kids back and forth. You might drive to the grade school to take your kids back and forth. What I would propose to you is the economics of today and the increasing price of energy demands that we think differently about our settlement patterns. We're not single lens reflex cameras anymore, right? We're digital cameras now. And we need to think smarter about how we live, where we live, right? And how we deal with that in our community. Do you think agriculture is becoming more important or less important?
More.
Do you think open space is becoming more important or less important?
More.
All right. Do you think housing or the cost of housing is an important issue?
Yes.
All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about settlement patterns. So we have the highest level of services. I just do that so you have to keep adjusting it. In the downtown area, right? That's what the police station is. That's what the fire station is, right? Okay. That level of services decreases as we move out into the suburbs and decreases further as we move out into the countryside, right? Okay. So if we put population in outlying areas, Frenchtown between here and Frenchtown, Clinton between here and Clinton, okay? The average miles the emergency services have to drive, or the buses have to drive, or the fire engines have to drive, goes up, right? Okay? So one choice we have is to live out here. Okay? not too close to you, but I'll live out here. The other choice we have is to move in closer into a suburban setting. Okay? And so here we have a settlement pattern which really looks kind of comfy and sort of low density, right? Lots of room out here. So I can come in and I'll just build a house in this vacant lot. Right? You guys okay with that? Not too nervous? Okay, well maybe just a little bit. Okay, another idea that we had was to do infill development. Okay? And infill development is where you come into an area that's just a little higher density. I'll make sure this happens on camera. And so, you guys both comfortable in your neighborhood? Yep. Lots of good space between you, both, everything's working really good. So we have this concept called infill development, right? So infill development happens where you've got some pretty close development. Right? And I want to settle in your neighborhood. Hey, neighbor. I'm a little uncomfortable. All right. And then I decide I want to build a duplex. Want to check his heart, Bill? Okay. So, patterns that might make the most sense in terms of economics. All right. So here's what happens when I come into this neighborhood. No more trust, right? Okay. This is the property tax base, right? When I come in and settle here, right, on the same piece of land, I've increased the property tax by 1/3, okay? The police car doesn't have to drive any more distance, nor does the fire truck, all right? So it's an efficient use of services, and it's more property tax per square foot, okay? All right, so in order to think about what's going to happen in the future, we have to make an assumption. Missoula grew for about as long as I've been here. It's somewhere between 1.6 and 2%. Okay, that's changing a little bit right now. But Missoula is going to continue to grow. In order to make the best use of the land and our resources being our own income and discretionary income and how we spend it for housing and for transportation and for energy, as well as the local government's expenditures for the same things, right? Because we just kind of talked about what's going to happen with revenue at the local government and the state government level. So we got to be smarter, or we're going to pay more money for it, right? So they have a profession called land use planning. So Elaine Hawk is a land use planner. I'm a land use planner. Andy over here practices land use planning, and we're all highly educated and incredibly skilled and have lots of experience. But here's what land use planning is. Land use planning is taking scarce resources, right, or a limited amount of resources, unless you think land is unlimited. I propose to you that it's not. They're not making any more at all. Is taking a scarce resource, right, and making decisions about how to use that resource, right, to make it function. So how many people dressed themselves this morning? I always hate to ask this, but how many people dressed themselves this morning? I don't care if someone else dressed you, you keep that to yourself. So you folks that are married, right, when you opened your bureau or looked in your closet, right, you probably had a rather extensive choice for your wardrobe. Oh gosh, it's raining today. Do I use the brown boots or the black boots? Do I use the low tops or the high tops? Okay. Oh gosh, I've got to go to Leadership Missoula. What should I wear? Oh, I've got a choice of Levi's. I've got a choice of Dockers. I've got a choice of Cords. What about a shirt? What shirt I wore yesterday? Or I wear a new shirt today? You know, what about a coat? So what's in your closet, right, is a scarce resource. Not so scarce if you're married. How many people are single? How many people are guys that are single? All right, talk about scarce resources. All right, you may decide not to wear an article of clothing one day. No socks, right, because there's none in the drawer. But somehow we all manage, in some way, to dress ourselves, right? So we take those resources and we use them to the best function for the day. You wouldn't dress like that if it was summertime in Missoula. You'd be cutting the bottom of your pants off for sure, right? Okay? So we all dress today, right, so we could function to our best today, but we had to choose scarce resources. So, Sean, why don't you come up? Get you off that camera.
So somebody.
I'll help you out.
Okay. And let's have Lady in Blue. Nice winter colors. And let's have the gentleman over on the end.
Check out her boots.
All right, so we'll go with you first. All right. Now, can you see your boots? Can you all see your boots? You can't see your boots. Right, stand up. So, you got up this morning. I'm assuming you dressed yourself. If not, right. There's resources below. Very functional for the eyes, I would say. Right. Okay. A certain amount of style, with respect to people doing. A nice accessory is a function of what happens in the room, or how she gets over to City Hall today, whether you walk or not. Okay. And fairly well color coordinated. Right. So, how did she do? She did a good job. So let's move over to academic casual. Mr. LLB, how are you? All right. So here we are. Fine in-style pants, right? Sort of an agrarian guy, but also a professor. That's, I guess, the beard, but that's not a part of the wardrobe. But color coordinated, except for the pink pen. We'll let you go on that, right? And sensible footwear to boot, right? So how did Sean do? You do a pretty good job. I feel like your wardrobe expected me as a speaker. Now, what do we hear? What do you got on for shoes there? Tennis shoes. All right, tennis shoes today. There you go. All right. You wore those because they're wide and a big surface and lots of friction, so you wouldn't slip on the ice, right?
No, they're in front of my closet.
All right, there you go. All right, there you go. All right. All right, so color coordinated for sure, right? Functional as a function of the resources that were available to him, right? Okay? And I think you look pretty good.
Well, thank you.
So how do you do? Good. All right. So I propose to you that the mystery of planning unfolds with this little theorem. If you understand the parameters associated with dressing yourself in the morning, you can be a land use planner. Okay? All right. So here's what I needed the system.
So much for skill.
Yeah, you go. Takes a lot of courage to assist me, okay? You hold that right there.
It's an easy assistant, though.
So far.
Come on, Vanna. There
Would
you
you
go.
lower that just slightly? All right. So I might need you to all sort of come up here, right? Because I'm not electronic Nick today.
Yeah.
All right, so come on up. Don't be shy.
Short girl in front.
Y'all recognize this? Piece of paper, right? Has ink on it? Okay. This is a map of Missoula. Go ahead and move in as close as you need to move in. Okay. So this map of Missoula shows the environs and the surrounding area. It's basically the available area for us to grow in, right? And it's the area that we have grown in. And so we have different settlement patterns. We have settlement patterns in around the University of Montana at about 6 dwelling units per acre. That's about what that density is, okay? We have settlement patterns in the South Hill where Lloyd Twite and Maloney Ranch are up in this area, okay? And those are about 3 dwelling units per acre. We have the Orchard Homes area, which initially were 5-acre tracts, right? Or about 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. We have the Mullen Road area, which is pretty much 1-acre tracts, except for a little bit of infill, which is Elmore Estates at about 3 per acre, which has its own sewer and water system. Okay, we have the Missoula County Airport. We have settlement in the Rattlesnake, in east Missoula, and out towards Bonner. Everybody familiar with this map? We've got some development down by Lola. Okay, so the first thing that we do in land use planning is subtract out those areas we don't want to develop. We don't want to develop. Okay. So if I didn't want to develop something, what would that be in this area? River bottom. Now why? You can hold those. You don't get to keep them.
Floodplain.
Floodplain. All right, so here's the Clark Fork River, and the floodplain generally for the Clark Fork River. Looks like that. Okay? Now we have the Bitterroot River, comes around the College U, pretty broad in through here, pretty broad in through there, fairly broad down through here, and down past Lolo. Okay? So that's our floodplain. We don't want to develop there. Where else?
Right next to the airport.
The airport. What would be the reason for that? Noise and safety. All right. Anybody here work out at the airport?
No, but I live up by there.
All right, there you go.
And I don't hear the planes.
Okay, so there's the airport.
The two.
Where else? Where else do we want to develop?
Agricultural land, but that's controversial.
Well, what isn't controversial?
Up in
I mean,
Mount.
what about development isn't controversial? Okay, and I want to tell you something about that controversy. Let me come over. Because I want you to feel it, okay? And it's why I used the demonstration that I did, okay? Because I will tell you right now, if you live in a teepee, you think you live in a mobile home. If you live in a mobile home, you think you live in a 10,000 square foot or 1,000 square foot home on a quarter-acre tract. If you live in a 1,000 square foot home on a quarter-acre tract, you think you live in a mansion, right? That's how we feel about the spaces we live in, all right? And when anything about our environment, our living space is threatened, it is a core value. It's the same value you would have if I walked up and kicked your dog while you were walking it, or if I came up and disciplined your child and you didn't even know me. A core value. Not an exterior value, all right? It's a core value. So when I come in and I put something next to you that affects you, okay, you don't feel it superficially. You feel it right down here. It's a core value, right? And even though it's my property and I may have the right to do it, right, you have strong feelings about that, okay? And change is another thing we have strong feelings about. We have to be aware, right, of that as we plan. And it takes education, and it takes understanding, and it takes time, because what you think about development that's happening in your neighborhood or next to you is vitally important. Why is that? Because where we develop and how we develop is a political decision, okay? You're in leadership in Missoula for one reason, right? So you can be a leader in this community. So you can be part of local government someday, or a leader in another fashion in the community. The only reason I'm here today, right, is to give you information that you can use in a leadership role to understand how all this works so you can make the right decisions, all right? But if you would thought for 1 second that the decisions made about how we settle and where we settle aren't political, you would be wrong, okay? So understanding how this all works is really important. So, some of our agricultural land, and thank you for bringing that up, happens out here in Orchard Homes and happens out here on Mullen Road. Now, in our growth policy, guess which two places, right, have been identified for future growth? Out on Mullen Road and out in Orchard Homes. So you brought up a really good point and a really vital point. So in the exercise that's coming up, that's something your group is going to have to think about and decide. Okay? Where else do we not want to develop? The mountains and hillsides. Okay, so I don't know if I have enough green ink, but basically what we're going to do is subtract everything that we see up here. That's it. And everything you see up here, that's in green.
Where's the golf course?
Just a second. That's a different color green.
One you play on?
All right. Everything out here, right?
That's fine. He's got it circled.
What this serves to illustrate, right? Half of Missoula County is owned by the United States government. Do you know that? Half of Missoula County is owned by the Forest Service of BLM. In this wonderful place, the mountains and the river bottoms and everything that makes this place identifies Missoula, all right, is on this map. The only place we have to grow is what's left from what we subtracted. Most of that is settled, okay, all right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break you into 6 groups. Okay? So what I want you to do is go back to your tables. So this